Hi, Michelle. Thank you for taking your time out to be here with me.
Thank you, Bryan. This is fun. And hi, Dan.
So I feel a good jumping off point for today would be a previous title they have earned at this event and what they called the World Domination Summit. And you're being knighted as a magician.
Yeah.
So what are some of the amazing feats you need to pull off, to earn this title?
I don't know if earn is the right word in this particular case, but it's a fun story. So I think I got the title. I think I spent my first 2 years on the WDS core team before I had a title at all. Actually, back then, nobody had titles on the original team. And I think, so one day, Chris Skillabo was trying to figure out, he wanted to give me a title and he was trying to figure out what an appropriate title was. And he said, well, how do you describe what you do? I said, I don't have any idea how to describe what I do for the team. Because the team right now, they've gotten people into really solid roles that really speak to their strengths, and they have pretty defined roles. I mean, still everybody does a little bit of everything, but they have pretty defined roles. Back then we didn't. So my job was literally, my role on the team was to do a little bit of everything. And he said, yeah, I think that's true, but I think you also have this knack for, one of us comes up with a crazy idea and we say, oh, Michelle, can you make this ridiculous thing happen with no resources, like to do it with nothing? And so he said, you're kind of like, you make things happen out of thin air. So that's where he decided that's like a magician, right? People who, the role was to make things happen out of thin air. So I think the reason I guess if I did anything to earn it.
What was the monumental?
Yeah, I think the monumental thing was that the second year, were you at the second WDS?
Oh, this is my first year.
What?
Yeah.
Oh
and
my
I'm so sad that, 2 more years.
They're going to be great though. They're going to be great years. Yeah. My favorite maybe was the second year, which was also in the theater that we had this year, the Newmark Theater. And this was before the WDS Foundation existed. Now they have the foundation where any profits, such as they are from the event, go to the foundation. They get given out as scholarships for real life. This is right before that got started. And there was a surplus. All the tickets had sold. We'd paid all the bills. There was a surplus. Great. So Chris wanted to try to figure out what to do with it. It also happened to be the year that his book, The $100 Startup, had come out. So we got this crazy idea as a team that we wanted to give every attendee, so 1,000 people, a $100 bill or $100. And so that they could do with what they wanted. They could reinvest in themselves, they could give it away, they could do whatever they wanted, but they had to do something good with it. And they could define good however they felt like. So I was given the task of how do you give 1,000 people $100? That was the question. And I think I was given, in somewhat true WDS style, a week to figure this out, maybe 10 days, something like this, right? So I did a lot of research and ended up concluding that I thought that the best way to do it was to literally give everybody a $100 bill. Not a gift card, not a refund on their way of paying for their ticket, but literally a $100 bill. So that was an adventure because you can't just go to the bank and take out $100,000 in $100 bills. You have to arrange that in advance. So Chris arranged all these things and we went and we got them, and then we had to put them all in envelopes for everybody, and then we had to secure this money for the next 4 days because you had to do it on a weekday, but the event, as you know, is on a weekend, and we were giving it out Sunday evening at the very end. So we had to secure all this money, and so it was a delightful afternoon spent in his dining room with envelopes and $100 bills and cigars and tequila, because we figured, I don't know, this is what you'd do if you're surrounded by a whole bunch of cash. You'd have cigars and tequila, right? I don't know. Anyway, So things like that. So I think that was the big feat that I helped pull off that earned me, if I did earn it, that title. And then for the next 3 years after that, I continued doing like a lot of everything on the team. So I did retire from that role. Wow, I guess it's been 3 years now.
Yeah, 2015.
Yeah,
right?
wow.
Were you there since the first year?
Yeah, since the very beginning. I met Chris 3 weeks before the first World Domination Summit.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And he somehow got me to join the team right then, and I'd been on the team ever since. So I was there at the beginning.
Tell me that story. What did you know about it 3 weeks before? How was the conversation like to sway you over?
He and I met, I had not heard of WDS before.
Oh, so 3 weeks.
That's right.
Okay, nothing.
Never heard of it.
With him? Do you have him?
I met him because he was the closing speaker for the first TEDx event that I hosted here in Portland. And so he was our closing speaker our very first year. And at the end of that event, he said to me, "You seem to know what you're doing with events. I have an event that's about this size coming up in a few weeks. Do you want to help?" And I said, sure. Like, how can I help? I don't know, whatever. And so he said, "Oh, just come to my house next week at this time. We'll have a meeting and we'll get you involved." And I didn't know, but sure enough, like I show up at that meeting and now I'm on the team. Like, that's how it goes. That's how it goes with Chris. He finds good people who do interesting things or who have a talent or, I don't know, something that he thinks there's potential there to help. And one of his favorite philosophies is that he puts people on his team who are already too busy. Like they already do too many things in their life, and then if they agree to add another, he knows that they're good for it. Because if they figured out how to do all that other stuff, and now they're like, "Oh yes, and I can also add this," he knows he's got a solid person who can juggle a lot of things, manage a lot of things, get a lot of things done in a short amount of time, limited resources, and so I don't know. So I always give people the advice of like, keep saying yes until you're in danger of not having life balance or not being able to take good care of yourself. But like, stay busy because more opportunities come your way.
And is that a philosophy you take on when you look for people as well?
Yeah, definitely. It's our crew, anybody at Wayfinding, we do a better job if we've got somebody who does this. And usually this has to be their primary thing that they do, but who also does other things, because then they're able to bring more resources and connections and ideas and things for the students. Wow. So yeah,
I never heard of something like that. Well, yeah, I'm gonna try it out and yeah, look for people who are already too tapped out and like give them more things.
Yep. I mean, it works.
Yeah, and also maybe paint me a picture of your life. What are the other things that you're juggling then when in the first year of WDS when you first joined?
Actually, that was probably one of the simpler times of my life. That, 8 years ago when I joined the WDS team. Because I was teaching. I was teaching a full-time job as a professor, like a normal full-time job, college professor. I was doing TEDx it was my second TEDx event. And I think that's all I was doing. I was kind of new to Portland still. I had not yet been here for a year. So I didn't have a whole lot I had some network from doing TEDx or from my work, but I didn't have a lot of other things I was involved in beyond that. So I think that was probably one of my simpler times of life, if there is such a thing. Because then after that, right, I kept adding things, right? I've had TEDx for 8 years now. Oh, wow. Right? So I haven't stopped doing that. I still do that. And I had that job for up until a couple of years ago, 2 years ago, 3 now. And then I added volunteering with another small organization called Super Thank, which is dedicated to radical community gratitude for stuff that matters. And I was doing WDS for 5 years. And then towards the end of WDS, I started wayfinding. And I'm still doing, all those other things. So I think back then was, like 8 years ago, was simple compared to now.
Well, you definitely have stressed a lot since then, like on your time.
Oh my gosh. It's amazing.
Yeah, so you were saying that you're a college professor, you came to Portland, and you, as a college professor, you get a pretty stable paycheck, you get some good benefits, and you get to have morning coffee with your fellow professors and talk about all the good and bad things that happen in the classrooms.
Professors don't do that as much as you would think they do.
So, at 2015, or maybe even before, like what gave you the impetus to start this new kind of college?
It was definitely before, because you're not just gonna wake up one morning and be like, "Oh, I'm gonna start a college today." That's gonna be the thing I do. So I think for me, the impetus started years before that. Probably when I was at my most steady, most stable, biggest paycheck, traditional life. Because this was probably 2003.
Oh, BU?
Yeah, well, I was at Providence College. So right after I was at Boston University, I took a tenure track job at Providence College. So if you're in a tenure track professor job, it's like the gold star of professor jobs, right? It's what you want.
You reached the peak.
Exactly. And so I'm in this job. I'm making like more money than I've ever made in my life, before that or after that. So like almost, not quite 6 figures. I owned a house, so I had a mortgage. And you're kind of guaranteed a job for life at this point. I hadn't gone through the tenure process, but I did the pre-tenure process, and all the reviews came back like, oh yeah, of course, just keep doing what you're doing and you'll be fine. And right around that time, a colleague and I he was pretty forward-thinking, radical. He studied a lot of organizational systems and structures. So he would do like the big picture systems and structures thing. And I was focusing more on individuals, teams, understanding why people behave the way they do. So more of the micro stuff, and he'd do more of the macro stuff. And he and I got together and we thought, well, what if because both of us would talk in our classes with students about like, what's college for and what's this all about? And we thought,
what kind of class is that?
I mean, any kind of class. Right. I mean, it's a conversation that could come up literally in any college class ever. Is like, because you could talk about it from any angle. Like, what's the purpose of grades, or how do we get everybody involved? So he and I decided to do a short seminar, and on this topic, on education, and we decided to call it "We Don't Need No Education." And we would get together with the group of students who signed up. I think it was like 8 or 10 students. And we would get together one night a week in the evening, and we'd have a meal, and over dinner we'd have conversation. We would have read something or watched something or gone on a field trip, and then we'd talk about it and talk about what it means for education and for people and what we like and what we don't like. And I think that changed something for me, because I started really listening to these students who had a lot of thoughts. Most of them were towards the end of their college career. Like maybe they were juniors or seniors when they did this seminar with us. And they had a lot of anger and frustration about...
What are some of the comments, or feedback kind of?
A lot of it was about feeling like they weren't being treated as people. They weren't being seen as whole people. That the whole higher education... And this is, a fancy, expensive 4-year private liberal arts college. That for a lot of them, it was like their top choice college to go to kind of a thing. And here they are at the end of it, feeling like, well, I just spent 4 years doing this thing, and I should know what I'm doing with my life. I should have some resources. I should have some next steps. And I don't. And what I have instead is this piece of paper with all these little check marks on it and letter grades. And I have like tens of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. And they were pretty angry because they thought that by going to college, they were going to get a lot of support and a lot of help figuring out like who they wanted to be in the world and what they wanted to do afterwards, and get help started doing it. And here they are at the end, and they feel like they got gypped. They didn't get any of those things. And that the whole thing was just sorting them the whole time. Because now they're ranked on like their GPA and their grade, and how are they in an honor society or are they not? And they're looking back realizing, oh, this is my whole life. My whole life was about my grades or my SAT scores or my ACT scores, and then my major, and then my grades in my class, and now my GPA, and now I'm applying for jobs, and they're like, don't even bother applying if you don't have this GPA. And they're like, this is crap. This doesn't say anything about me and who I am. And now they're mad, right? Because they just spent all this time and money and energy, and now they're in debt for who knows how long, and they didn't get the thing they were searching for. So I knew that frustration from being a student, but what really got to me right around then was that I was part of the problem.
So let me just stop you there a little bit, because you mentioned you feel the same problem when you went through college for yourself. So how did you figure that part out? Like, what struggles did you go through personally to find to be landed into this great job that now, like back then, you have?
Yeah, I think I don't think I had the skills to think that through critically until I was in the professor role. You know, like I think like most young people, I went to college because that's what I was told I was supposed to do. And I'm the oldest of 4 children. Yeah. And as the oldest of 4 children, it was like, okay, well, you're the first child and this is the thing that we do. And all of my siblings after me, like I did exactly what you're supposed to do, right? I go from high school to college to grad school to job. And none of my other siblings did that, partly because they watched me do that and watched me struggle with like, I'm not sure this is the right thing. So, but I don't think I let myself really think about it in a deep, intentional way until I was at the very end of it. Like maybe at the end of grad school, and then maybe I paused it again for a while to be like, okay, let me see if I can get a job doing this thing. Because I loved teaching. I was like pretty good at it and I really, really enjoyed it. And so as long as I was doing that activity, everything was wonderful. It was only when I paused and stepped back and really reflected on it and started listening to these more macro conversations that I realized this isn't what I want to do, or it's not the way I want to do it, and I don't think it's the way any of us should be doing it. But I don't think I paid any attention. I mean, I did the traditional things, like I picked a college because I was told to.
Swept it under the rug, huh?
Yeah, and I changed my major a few times, but...
Did you?
Oh, yeah.
What
3 times, I think.
So the different majors that...
Well, at the beginning, I thought I wanted to be a lawyer, and so I first started studying like history and criminal law sorts of stuff, and then after that, I picked. So that lasted like 1 semester, and then I switched to business, which was okay. I actually ended up keeping that one.
Okay.
But.
A general enough major.
It was a general enough major, but really what I ended up doing was psychology. So once I took a psychology class and realized, no, that's what I really like, psychology was the 3rd thing I chose, and that was the one I ended up sticking with. And then I did grad school in that, and then I always taught in business departments, but I was teaching psychology. I was teaching management, organizational behavior, leadership, those kinds of things.
And so coming back to the impetus.
Right.
You hear all the students, they're frustrated. And you have this class, you threw out this seminar, we call it a seminar, 2 hours, open conversation.
Right.
And that got you thinking. What happened? How was the build up?
That's when I would say that's what the first time I started really listening. Like listening to students, listening to what was going on around me, and listening to, so that was probably 10 years ago. It was probably 2006. So that's 12 years ago. Wow. So, okay, so maybe I'm a slow learner. I don't know. Because I had to listen for like a lot of years, I think. At first I was listening just to students, but then I started noticing things about the way the system is run. First, the system of colleges, like the college I was at, how did that decisions get made? Who was really at the center of things? Who was really most important? They all say like students first, right? Where students are at the center of everything we do. Students are the most important. Right. When you really look at how decisions get made and how resources get spent, I felt like a lot of it wasn't really about the students. And so I had an experience where that really made it super obvious to me and made me...
Can you give me an example?
Yeah, I probably shouldn't tell the whole story.
Oh yeah, please leave any names out and you know.
It's a colleague of mine was having a romantic relationship with a student, which I don't necessarily have any issue with, as like these things happen. That's fine, but I did have problems with sort of power dynamics and manipulation and things like that. And were this to happen now, in the era of the Me Too movement, this would have never gone the way it went back then, 10 years ago.
How did it went?
So he was investigated by the university, and I was called in among many others of my colleagues to testify about what we knew and what we had seen and all this. I was close with both him and the student. And I knew that, I knew that it was happening because they both told me it was happening.
Oh, okay.
So it was not a question of whether it was happening. It was, they wanted to know, like, well, the university was trying to figure out whether it was happening. And I got called in and I shared what I knew, anything I'd seen or heard or been told. And this went on for several months where they called in a lot of people and they investigated this. And as part of that, it came out that this was the third time they were investigating him for the same behavior.
With different students?
Different students over the years, yeah. And in the end, nothing happened. In the end, those of us who got called in to testify had a couple of us ended up having administrators sitting in on our classes to make sure that we weren't doing things we shouldn't have been doing, sort of like this intimidation sort of a thing. And he kept his job, and as far as I know, he's still there, and nothing ever happened to him. And nothing ever, and even worse, the student was not helped or supported or protected or any of that. And those of us who were asked to share what we knew were treated pretty horribly. And that's what made me realize, oh, this system is set up to sort of protect its own, right? So it's like, this is a tenured faculty member who's been there a lot of years, who's a white male with some privilege in this system, and he was going to get the better end of the deal no matter what anybody said or did or whatever else. Again, I don't think that would happen right now in the era of the Me Too movement. I think that would turn out quite different. Yes. But in the conversations I had with administrators and with the legal counsel at the college, it made me realize that this isn't, that the way, that what colleges say they're about and what they actually do, there's a lot of disconnect there. And so I just, for my own, from at that point in my life, I was I guess I was 30. Okay. And I had gone straight through everything, right? I went to high school, I went to college, I went to grad school, I got a job, I got a tenure track job. And I'd never stopped and paused to think about, what am I doing? What is my purpose? Why am I doing this? And so I took a year off. I resigned pretty suddenly. Right. You don't resign at the end of an academic year. You don't, because that's not how the hiring cycle goes. So I resigned in March, I think. And May was the end of the semester. And so I didn't have another job lined up. So I said, well, I'm just going to give myself a year off and I'm going to take a break. And I moved across the country to a place where I didn't know anybody, where I could sort of reset myself and really think about why and what it is I'm doing and what I want to be doing. And at that time, I started reading a lot of books, watching movies, doing things like this about higher education system, and in particular, alternative education models, mostly at the K through 12 level, because there's not a lot at the higher education level. So sort of a chance to pause and reflect and really think about this stuff. And it was also hard. Do
you have any allies along your journey?
Some. Yeah. I had people who understood and agreed with the things I was observing, because they were observing them too. In some cases, they knew them long before I did, and they were like, well, it's about time you started noticing these things. What they didn't agree with, though, was my decision to leave. And my family at the time, I remember having a really strange conversation with my dad back then, because like I said, I owned a house, I had a mortgage, I had the job everybody wants that I got to keep for life if I wanted. I had the biggest paycheck I was ever going to have in my life. And I was basically saying, I don't want any of that. I would rather have purpose, or I would rather have something that I feel like is adding value. And that's just not the family background I came from. So my dad definitely didn't understand and said, I think you're making a huge mistake. Don't do this. And I did it anyway. So I had a lot of friends who agreed with me, saw the same things I saw, but thought I was making a bad choice to walk away because of it. So that was hard because of that.
Do you frame it as you're walking away, or do you frame it as I'm taking a break?
I don't remember. At the time, it was probably both. Right. All I knew was I needed to get away from that place, like that city and that job and that place and those people, because it was too much to see that, like, what it really was and what it said it was and what it actually was didn't match. The extent to which it didn't match was so severe that, and by then I had been listening to students enough to know that faculty members are part of the problem. In generally speaking, with this system of them feeling like they're just being sorted and judged and rated and graded, that faculty members are the ones doing it. And there are ways to do it with compassion and kindness and understanding and tearing down the power dynamic and the fear associated with it and the judgment associated with it. But most faculty don't do that. And you're not rewarded when you try to do that.
Oh yeah, I mean the incentive system is just not structured that way, right? So you have some sort of a seed of an idea that this is something wrong. From knowing something is wrong, running away from it, to doing something that you want to, there's a huge gap, right? And even then, knowing how you want it to look like, or the idea you want to sort of bring to the world, there's also the personal doubt that you need to go through. Do you have any of that moments, or anything that you need to work through yourself, or you have great people like Chris that just like, that's just how we do it?
I mean, never ever in my life did I think I wanted to be an entrepreneur or like somebody to start something. That's not really, that was never a thought. In fact, it was probably a year after I started wayfinding that I got invited to speak at a thing for women entrepreneurs, and that was the first time it really occurred to me that I was an entrepreneur. After I had, because that's not really what I thought of.
Just labels anyway.
Myself doing, exactly. And so I think that for me, that gap was filled with, I took the year off and I missed teaching a lot. I realized that really is the thing that brings me joy. And it was at the time my highest, best contribution to the world, was to, even within the flawed system, to be a ray of hope and a light, and to help students really break that down for themselves and find their own purpose for being in it, even if it meant that they're going to stay in it and, have to finish out whatever higher education journey they're on. So I went back to it, but when I went back to it after that year break, I went back to it quite differently. Philosophically, I had a really different approach, and I sort of turned over the class to the students. So they had a lot more say in what we did and how we did it, and they got to decide their own grades. And I took myself out of those roles and put them in those roles, so that they were empowered to do all that. In the context. And I was more of like a facilitator of creating a learning community where we could all get something out of it. And so I think for me, I was content doing that for a while until I realized I was running into the same barriers again. Like I could do whatever I wanted in my class, but then they'd still go out they'd go to their next class and it'd be the opposite of that. Right. And so it wasn't helping enough, I guess. So a couple of years, I'd say probably 2 years before I left teaching, I just got this sense of, and I don't even really know how to describe it. Wow. It was almost this feeling of, I have to do something. I was compelled to do something. And I remember at the time I was, kept journals a little bit. I've never been a big journal keeper. Like I don't keep a journal at all now. But back then I'd keep little bits of journals, and I wrote to myself that I don't know the thing exactly that I'm doing next, but whatever the thing is that I'm doing next, it's going to be a big leap. It's going to be something much, much bigger than just changing cities or changing from one college to another or changing a job title. It's going to be something much bigger and much different. And then I had to figure out what that thing was going to be. At around that time, I met my now very, very good friend, Sean Aiken. Do you know Sean Aiken, his work? Mm-hmm. He's Canadian, and when he graduated from college, he was at the top of his class. He'd done sort of like do what everybody says you're supposed to do. He graduated at the top of his class, and he realized this frustration, this anger. He says, I have no purpose. I have no idea what I'm supposed to do in my life. Nobody helped me figure this out. I guess I have to do it myself. And he came up with this project called the 1 Week Job Project. So for 1 year, 52 weeks, he did a different job every week in search of his passion, in search of his purpose. And he had a friend who was a filmmaker. So his friend was like, well, I'll just document this. Who knows what'll happen? He wasn't doing it to document it originally. And then they documented it, and he ended up with a film and a book out of it. Wow. And more or less discovered his purpose and passion. And it had to do with helping other people find theirs, either through education or through public speaking or what have you. Yeah. And he and I met and became friends about a year after his project was over. And so we would, sometimes I'd go up to Vancouver and visit him. Sometimes he'd come down to Portland and visit me. Yep. And we'd have these very long, rambling conversations about higher education and what's wrong. And if we were going to start something, what would it look like? And so the idea originally started as just sort of like a little, exactly. Conversations with Sean. And at first was going to be just like a little program, like something students could do the summer before they go to college, or something that they could take like a semester off, like a study abroad thing, where they go away for a semester, figure out their passion and purpose, and come back to college. So it started out kind of like that. And we started mapping this all out and figuring this all out and being like, I don't think this can be done in a tiny little point in time. And we realized that the real goal was going to be, at least my goal. Right. I shouldn't say that this was Sean's goal, because his goal is to help people figure out what makes them come alive and help them get to doing it. Right. My goal was that, plus I really want to nudge change in higher education. I think we don't do it the way we could be doing it and should be doing it. And so I said, I think what I would like to do is start an actual college that goes through all of the formal, official, everything you've got to do to be an actual legitimate degree granting college, and not just a program, because it's too easy to dismiss, oh, that's a cute little program over there that does this thing. But my point is, this is what college should be doing, and college isn't doing this. And I don't think every college needs to do this, because there's certainly room for the Harvards of the world who don't necessarily do this, but prepare people for other sorts of things. That is also important. But we have too many colleges and too many students not getting this out of that experience.
So that would explain why you want to go through the hurdle of the accreditation with OHEC.
That's right.
Stands for Oregon Higher Education Coordinating Commission.
Right, exactly. And I'll tell you a secret. I guess it's not going to be that much of a secret after this. I first decided I'm starting my own college. Yeah. I then named it, built my team, and then learned OHEC exists. Oh. I didn't know. Right. I mean, who knows? Like, might be a good thing. Who knows? Oh yeah, if I had known all the things, I would. Holy moly! Oh, yeah. I mean, if you knew all the things you don't know forget it. Yeah. Like
That's where dumb luck comes into play sometimes.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. And I mean, nobody I know has ever started a college. Right? It's still not a thing, right? It's still not a thing, people, right? So there's not like a way to look it up. You can't Google it. How do I start a college? And find like a list of resources or ideas. And there's just no how-to on this. So it was only through having lots of conversations. And finally, I was having this one conversation with this woman who years before had been involved in trying to start a yoga-based college in the state of Oregon. And she said, oh, have you met yet with the people over at OHEC? And I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. So she's the one who taught me about OHEC, and she introduced me to somebody over there, and I had several very wonderful conversations and found out all about their process and whatever. And of course, we still had time to do all of that. So we spent 1 year, which is not very long in the grand scheme.
Is it 2015 or is it 2014 they find out about OHEC?
Let's see, that would have been 2015.
Wow, okay. So you're on a timeline already.
Yeah, I'd already convened my founding what ended up being my founding team. We'd already gotten together, had a few conversations. And that's at the same point that I started learning about OHEC and reading up on what all of the different steps were. I went down there they're at the state capitol. They're a state governmental regulatory agency. And so like they're no joke. I mean, it's right, they're enacting laws that are passed by the legislature of Oregon to regulate and govern higher education institutions. So I went down to Salem and met with them twice, I think, and then started doing the paperwork and the processes. And it takes a number of months. You submit the thing, and then they say, okay, it might take us up to 6 months to get back to you. And it took them 6 months to get back to, you know.
So you had one try, really?
Yeah, and you're not allowed to start recruiting students or doing any of that until you have their approval. Right. So we were able to start, that was the time when we built the curriculum, we started doing branding, we wrote our creed, we started figuring out how we were going to go about recruiting students when the time came, we started looking for buildings, so we did all of those things, but it wasn't until they said, this is going to go through, were we able to say, okay, and open our application process. So there was a lot of like waiting and just having to be overly optimistic. So to your question about self-doubt, it's not a thing I think about a lot, which is why I struggle with the question.
No, I understand. That's like me too.
And I think it's not that I don't have it, because I definitely have it, but it shows up in weird occasions. And my role, once I had a team, my role has been being the overly optimistic, confident person and saying, oh, this is all going to be fine. Trust me, we've got this. Because if I'm not the one doing that, nobody else is going to be the one doing it. Because the rest of the team, you know?
You gotta drink your own Kool-Aid.
Right. I have to be the one. And I obviously have to be also realistic and transparent and honest about everything. Yeah, yes. And so I can say, I don't know. I mean, all indications seem to be a clear go-ahead, yes, everything's going to be fine with whatever it is, fundraising or OHEC or student recruitment or whatever. And I have data to back that up or evidence of some sort to back that up or whatever, when you really don't know what the answer is going to be. You really don't know the outcome until you get to the outcome.
This is just a guess.
Right. But I also know that my founding team was this like force of nature or something. I don't know, like anything that they decided they were going to do, they did. Right. So like even the weirdest, strangest goals that we set, we still did them.
Well, like, what are some of those? I kind of let that slip by.
The first crowdfunding campaign that we did 3 years ago, it was my first time running a crowdfunding campaign. Crowdfunding campaigns are very hard. I think people assume, I'm just going to launch this little thing online and everybody's going to give money and it's going to be fine and whatever. It's like a full-time job. Oh, yeah. And you have to plan months and months and months and months before you press go. Oh, yeah. And most crowdfunding campaigns do not succeed at reaching their goal. It's less than 50% that even reach their goal. And the average amount of money raised in a crowdfunding campaign is $7,000, or it was 3 years ago. It's probably less now. And we had to make a decision early on. People were telling us, several of these early decisions, we often chose the hardest path, right? So the place I was working here in Portland at the time, Concordia, were really supportive. When they found out I was going to start my own college, they said, well, that's great. It's needed. We need more choice in higher education. Why don't you just incubate it here? Use our buildings, use our internet, use our infrastructure, use our legal team, use our HR, you know? And I said, no, thanks. I'm going to do the hard way. But
why did you actually turn that down?
Because if my goal is to start a movement to change higher education, I needed to be able to go step outside of an already existing institution and all of its bureaucracies and all of its safety nets and create a thing over here that is legitimate in the same eyes as that is, right? That's approved by HEC also just like they are or what have you. And be able to say, no, this is a legitimate, also fair way of doing college. Like you could do it that way or you could do it this way. And I didn't want it to be easily dismissible of, this is a cute thing that this one college in Portland, Oregon is doing. They do this little thing. Great. and the bureaucracy. Like anytime you're in an institution of that size, you've got bureaucratic red tape and a lot of people telling you what you can and can't do. And I wouldn't have been able to say like, here's my team, I'm hiring all these people. I would have been like, no, your budget is this and you get to hire one person maybe as an assistant. And you're not going to start a movement with one maybe assistant person, right? So that was the hard way. And then when it came to getting the startup money to start the thing, I was getting a lot of advice from people saying, oh, just find one or two big donors. Because we did the math and we figured we needed about $200,000 to get going for the 1 year before we had students.
Faster to find one or two.
Oh yeah, I think so, right?
Right, yeah.
Faster, probably faster.
Yeah.
And easier.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, I would have had to get some really good introductions, but probably could have done that. Yeah. So people kept saying, oh, just find a couple of big investors and then start. And our team talked about it and we realized, again, if what you're really trying to do is start a movement, you need a whole lot of people. Like you need some evidence that the thing you're wanting to start, the conversation you're wanting to get everybody into, is something people actually believe in, agree with, and want to get involved in. Because if you don't know that, then how are you going to do any of the rest of it?
So as much as it is getting the $200,000, it's also getting the amount of people that is
right. We needed the
supported.
community. We needed a community to back it. And like in our creed, one of our lines is that we believe community and college should be woven together. And so when we were going to these foundational beliefs, it doesn't make sense for us to get one or two wealthy people to say, here's some money to start your project. Right. What made more sense to us, which is what we ultimately did, was to get 700 and something people to all give small or medium or a couple of cases large amounts of money and say we're behind this thing, and to get the money we needed that way. So for us, it was the harder thing to do for sure, and the more uncertain thing to do. And $200,000 in the land of nonprofit organization crowdfunding campaigns is unheard of. We are still to this day the highest funded Indiegogo campaign in Oregon history. We outpaced the previous higher funded campaign by $80,000. It's unheard of to raise $200,000 in a crowdfunding campaign for something that's not like the coolest cooler or whatever, right?
So just so people, to stop people from just running around and thinking that they can raise $200,000.
Oh yeah, I don't recommend it. I seriously don't recommend. Like it's really very, very hard. And
well, give me a bit of like war stories over there.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
And what's the biggest misconceptions or things you need to learn along the way, the mistakes you make along with it?
Okay, I'll give 3 points with crowdfunding, right? The first thing is, before you launch a crowdfunding campaign, you need to get 1/3 to 1/2 of that money, of your goal, pre-pledged in advance.
How do you do that?
You ask a lot of people and you get them to pre-pledge and you tell them you're doing the thing. So one thing we didn't do the first time we ran a crowd 3 years ago, my first time doing it, and this is actually on the eve of WDS 2015, the year that I was going on stage as the magician to say I'm retiring as the magician to start my own college. On that eve, we had probably $30,000 pre-pledged, $40,000 maybe at best pre-pledged, and all of the wisdom we were given by all of the experts would have told us that the most you can launch that campaign for is $80,000, the very most. And we were like, nah, we can do this. Let's just do it. 200,000, we can do it. And once you press go on Indiegogo, you don't get to change it. You are stuck. Once you turn it on, you cannot.
If you can't get it,
And if you can't get it, you don't get it. Yes. If you can't raise your goal, you don't get any of the money. So we were like, nah, whatever, we can do it. And we pressed go on 200,000. And the next day, my mentor saw that we launched it at that, and he called me and he said, "You're insane. You're insane. You're not going to do this. This is not going. What is your? How are you going to do this?" So there's one more story.
Right.
We did it, and and then the other thing, in addition to getting the pre-pledges, is all crowdfunding campaigns go through a very similar cycle. You raise about 1/3 of your money in the first week to 10 days. Then you enter what they call the valley of despair. It's a long period of time where you have very, very little activity. maybe little trickles of donations coming in, but very, very little. And you've got this thing live and you're still working really hard. You're still doing stuff every day to try to get it more things happening, and it just doesn't happen for a while. And then in the last week to 10 days, you raise another third of your money. So you get like a third at the beginning, a third at the end, and then a third in these very random spurts in the middle. So ours was no different. And going into our last 3 days of the campaign, we were still, I think, $20,000 short and didn't know how we were getting there, right? So on the very, very, very last day, or maybe we had 36 hours left.
Would you have like pull out 20,000, like take a loan and like just put it in?
I didn't have 20,000. I mean, some people do that. Some people do pull out money out of their own pocket as the founder or as the whatever, but I didn't have 20. Like for me, that wasn't an option because I didn't have $20,000. So I probably could have called in a favor or something like that and done things like that. We did end up actually, we had one of our founding team members said that he would do that and he would loan 5,000. So that still wasn't going to get us there, but he's like, I can do 5,000. So with 48 hours left to go, we said, just go ahead, do it, because we don't know how else we're getting there. So he put in his 5,000,
right,
which we ended up paying him back, and we ended up raising 207,000. Right. So we ended up not needing it, but we didn't know. We didn't know. Right. We thought we needed it because the last day, it's me, Tina, Tito, Jefferson. We're sitting at McMiniman's Kennedy School, doing like whatever we possibly can to try to make it to this little last bit. And we get Tina's sitting next to me on her laptop, and she gets this really random email saying, I'm trying to put through this donation and I can't, it's not working. I keep getting an error message. Can you call me? So Tina calls this person and she's like, error message? Why would you get that error message? It's very weird. And one of the things we learned through crowdfunding is that if you're using a debit card, if you're trying to take out of a bank account will limit you to $4,999 over withdrawal in a single day. So if you try to give $5,000 from a bank account to a crowdfunding campaign or anything else, it will reject it. And this woman was describing that basic problem, and I was like, there's no way that some random person who we have not asked is in the process of trying to give us $5,000. Okay. We thought there's no way. Right. So Tina calls this person, and sure enough, that's what was happening. And it turns out, it's like, hi, Robbie. It turns out it's the mom of a student I had at one of the classes I had taught multiple years before. And I had made a huge impact on her daughter's life. With the class, the passion-based leadership class that I taught. And the daughter had been following along on all this, unbeknownst to me. And her mom happened to have just sold a house and had some extra revenue and said to her daughter, like, I want to do something good with it. What do you think? And her daughter said, I think you should do this. And Robbie has now gone on the Camino, Learn and Explore trip with us, not once, but twice, and continues to support us and is going to be at graduation and like knows all of our graduating students. And it started because she was like, I want to do something good with this money I have from this house sale. What should I do? And so in our last 24 hours, she came through and gave this, and without her, we would have not made the goal.
Oh my God, was your stomach like quenching?
It was amazing, unbelievable. And Tina and I sat there in shock going, oh my gosh, I can't believe that just happened. Like, and we made our goal within, like, I don't know, I think we had something like 10 hours to spare or 12 hours to spare, which also is unheard of, right? So we were sitting there going, oh my gosh. So we're at McMiniman's Kennedy School and we just reached our goal and we watched the thing tick over on the Indiegogo and we're like, holy crap, that just happened. And then it kept coming, you know, because then we got another like 7,000 or whatever. Yeah.
It's like, wow.
So it's like these high joys and unexpected things and things that happen out of the blue that you're just so excited about. And these valleys of despair that are like really hard, really hard. So I don't recommend crowdfunding for most things. It's very hard. Right. And B, don't ever try to raise $200,000. I mean, it's No. I really don't recommend it. Yeah. I haven't thought about that. I haven't thought about some of those stories in a really long time. So thank you for that.
Well, also thank you for telling, like recommending people not to do it. Unless, at your own risk.
Yeah, do it at your own risk. I think there are certainly times when it will serve you well. Like for us, it was the right decision to make. It was the harder thing to do. But for what we wanted to do, we needed community. And that campaign gave us our founding community that has gotten us through these first several years. And so right now we're doing some things to try to expand that community for the next stage of growth. But without those original founders, and I know it's not viewable on the video right now, but right on this wall above us right here are all of the names of those 700 people. So every day we look at the names of those 700 people and recognize that we wouldn't be here were it not for those people. Yeah.
And since we're on the topic of money.
Oh, my favorite topic.
You have a little tiny house parked outside your friend's place. I read somewhere. I'm not sure if I can trust anything on the internet these days.
Right. Somewhere nearby. Yeah.
But how does your financial game plan looks like for securing and maintaining your personal finance while taking the risk of doing something that might not work?
Right. Generally speaking, I think we're past the stage where we're pretty sure it's working now.
Right. But back then,
So I feel really fortunate to have had just a couple of really good mentors in my life. And I have one very, very dear friend who I could call up and ask the most random piece of advice about anything and know that he'll give me solid advice that's thought out from multiple perspectives and whenever possible from his own personal experience. And he'll tell me the goods and the bads. And when I was he was on my founding team. He is on my founding board. He is still on my board. And I keep him because I need his advice and his sound.
Does his name start with C?
No, but he's fantastic too. My board chair, Charlie. Oh, he's so great. I didn't know Charlie back. I knew Charlie a little bit back when I started wayfinding, but I got to know Charlie much more in the years after. No, this is Jefferson. Okay. And Jefferson has started multiple other startup entrepreneurial nonprofit ventures in his life. And so when I convened a very small group of people and said, and we sat in a student's apartment at Concordia, and I told them, I said, I want to quit my job and I want to start a college and I'd like your advice. Can you all talk to me about why this is a good idea, why this is a bad idea? Give me everything you can think of. And I just listened to them for a very, very long time. And one of the pieces of advice he gave me was that if I could do it, and it was going to take a lot of work to figure this out, but if I could, to not take a salary myself for the first 1 to 2 years of starting my nonprofit. People is your biggest expense in any organization, in any sort of startup venture. And he said, if I could, by whatever means necessary, not pay myself, it would enable me to pay other people immediately and bring a team immediately, because I'm going to do it no matter what. I would do, and I still would do whatever it took. Yeah. This is my life's work. This is my legacy. This is my passion. Yeah. I'll do anything I have to do. Paid, not unpaid, doesn't matter. But to ask other people to do that is a bit of a stretch. My original founding team was all volunteers. For at least 6 months, everybody was a volunteer. And then I paid one person, and then I paid 2 people, and then I paid 3 people, and then I paid, right? I think I was up to paying 10 people, 11 people, before I paid myself. Wow. So for the first 2 years, so the entire year of planning plus the entire year of the first year with students, I didn't get paid. And I've not even
good advice there.
Yeah, and I've only been paid since September, so it's not even been a year that I've been being paid now. And his advice was really, really good. It was also it's really hard to follow because like, how are you going to intentionally go into, I started out with pledging 1.5 years of no salary, and I ended up making it 2 full years with no salary. And he was right, because it enabled me to pay other people. It enabled me to, and he said, there are going to be some hard times. There are going to be some times when you're asking way, 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 way too much of other people. And
do it anyway.
And because, well, he said, do it anyway. You're going to have to. You have no choice.
Right.
Ask that of them. And one of the things you're going to have backing you up is that you aren't getting paid. So they know that you're not personally benefiting from any of the things that you're, right?
The easy ask.
So it makes it easier. It still makes it's still hard.
Yeah.
Having a tiny house was absolutely essential during that time. I've been in my tiny house for 8 years. So I didn't get a tiny house when I started wayfinding.
Oh, okay.
I'd already been.
Right.
I'd already been living in a tiny house for years. And I made that decision years ago. Shortly after I did that, leave my job, move across the country, take a year off thing, because I realized in that move, I only took with me, when I moved across the country, what could fit in the back of my car. And I fell in love with the idea of simplicity and simple living, and only having what you needed to have so that you could spend the rest of your time and energy on things that really mattered.
Yeah.
So I decided to do the tiny house because of that, because I wanted to spend as much of my time and energy on things that really mattered. And having a tiny house and a simple life helped me to do that. Yeah. I don't know that that's the right choice for everybody. I'm sure it's not. But as a single person with no kids, I was able to do that, and it worked for me. So I made that choice. That came in absolutely essential when I had no salary for 2 years. I saved up some money. Right. After I made that decision, I was working for almost a year, and I saved as much as I could possibly save, and it was nowhere near enough.
And also, I think that gave you the 1 year that you were saving money, gave you the track record of like, how can I cut expense? Like thinking about that, right? Yeah. And then now, maybe the expense cut in half, then the amount of money that you save stretches in two.
Exactly. It had to be, I had to stretch it. And I also did things that I didn't ever really plan on doing or think about doing.
What was that?
So one of the things that I did, and I believe in honesty and transparency, and using the safety nets that we have, such as they are, and they're not very good, generally in our society. In the United States, the safety nets that we have in place for people leave a lot to be desired. But when you need them and you find that they're there for you, it's really helpful. So the first thing that I did was, after I stopped working, I didn't have any health insurance. So actually, no, that was the second thing I did. But because I had purchased my own personal health insurance thing for a while, and I did that. And then I went on to Medicaid. So I was on the free health insurance through the state, through the state of Oregon, because I qualified for it through the Obamacare. So it was great. And I used that for 1.5 years, and it was fantastic to have that. The other thing I did was I went into the food stamps program. So I know, right? And it's a thing. I'm a college professor.
Good on you.
With a PhD, and it was a very weird barrier. It was a mental block that I had to think through of, do I qualify for this? Under what circumstances do I take this assistance? Because asking for help for me at the time was very, very, very hard. Now I get real good at it. Now I ask people for stuff all the time. But back then I was like, oh, this is weird. And I'm asking for help, not from a person, but from, in this case, the state of Oregon. And I remember you fill out this online thing, and then they do a phone call with you. And I remember that first phone call being so nervous and thinking, like, am I doing the right thing? Am I not doing the right thing? And so I just shared with the woman I was talking to my entire story. I said, I'm starting my own college. It's a nonprofit. I left my job. I'm taking no salary. This is all my situation. I might not qualify for this. I don't know what you guys' criteria is on your end. And if I don't qualify, no problem. But here's my scenario. And she said, no, it sounds like you qualify. And so for about little over a year, I got food assistance. And so I would get I don't know, it was just under $200 a month for my groceries. Okay. And that helped so much.
Do you make it work?
Right? I made it work, yeah. Oh, yeah. It was more than I needed because I have a simple life and a tiny house and a...
That's awesome.
So I was able to...
Do you make it work in a sense whereby, like, do you feel very cashed in, or do you feel like, yeah, $200 is good enough? It's like...
Oh, no, it was plentiful for me because as a single person, but it was plentiful. And I even was able to stockpile, I'd buy extra food so that when I didn't have that available to me anymore and I was still on a very tight budget, I had some like rice and things like this that I could use. So I feel like our sense of what we need is inflated. Like I was able, I think I had saved up something like $15,000 and I had to live off of that for 2 years.
And you did?
And I did. For 2 years, I lived off of $15,000 and I still paid my rent and I still had credit card debt that I had to pay and student loans that I paid sometimes and other times were in deferral. And I got help from the state of Oregon for healthcare and food and I made it work. So I think a lot of times these barriers about the financial need are in our own minds. And if you really pause and think about, and maybe I got an app on my phone where I tracked every dime that I spent for that last year that I was working. So I knew exactly how much money I spent on things, knew exactly where I could cut, and started that process of simplifying and cutting while I still had an income so that it wasn't such a huge shift for me. So I feel like we all have the power to do that if we choose to make it a priority and a focus for us. And I think a lot of times we just don't. Yeah.
We don't need to, and it's easier to not shine a spotlight on those unconsciously made decisions.
Yeah.
Right?
So the tiny house thing has been great both from the simplicity perspective and financial.
Stretch you 2 years.
2 years.
Tell me, give me a breakdown of a month. Like how does a month of expenditure look like for you?
What I ended up finding out by tracking every dime that I spent for a year was that I need somewhere between $900 and $1,100 a month for my basic, for gas, groceries, car insurance, rent, a little bit of money for, food, a little bit of money for like doing bonus things so that I could still have some sort of a life. Yeah. Travel is really important to me. I do a lot of travel hacking. That could be a whole nother conversation. Yeah. So travel was a thing I wasn't willing to give up. So I found ways to still get free hotel points and airline miles and keep traveling, which still cost me a little bit, but very, very little. So somewhere between $900 and $1,100 a month was what I needed.
But it doesn't add up to 24 months, does it?
No, so I had to stretch and I had to find other ways to do things. So for a little while, thankfully, tiny houses happened to get real popular during that time. So sometimes when I would be traveling, I could rent my house on Airbnb and bring in a little bit of money, not a lot, but a little bit so that I could use that to pay rent for some of the months, or to pay for the travel or to pay for food or what have you. So small things like that. And then finally, at the very, very, very end, I ran out of money. I ran out of money 3 months before I was going to start getting paid. And I sold my car and bought another used, cheaper car and got a little bit of cash back from that process, which got me through the final 3 months. So, but it kind of was unexpected at the end because I was like, oh, wait, no, I have 3 months to go and I now literally have no money. So, but my other goal was that I didn't want to worry about it because I had enough to worry about starting a college and managing all of the people and all of that process and all of the stress that came with that. So I needed money, my personal financial situation, to not be a source of stress for me. And that is a mental game. Like that's an entirely mental game because by all standards, I should have been highly, highly stressed about my own personal financial situation. And I mentally made the choice not to be.
Well, I think you did a good straddle, right? I think like on one hand you had the 1 year to prepare and like cut the expenses, so you feel a little bit more secure in that sense, and you just save up a bunch. So at least like okay, well this is the amount, and multiply by this amount of months, this should be it. And also you have that lake whereby if all else fails, maybe I could go back for a year and put it on pause. You never know, but
That never occurred to me.
Oh, okay.
I never thought of like, oh, I'll just pause the project and go, you know, because it wasn't going to be my personal financial situation wasn't, I would not let that be the thing that kept this from going.
Right, or but you could teach part-time.
Could have.
But it never occurred.
I mean, maybe at some point it occurred to me, but no, it never was a real option for it. It never occurred to me as like, oh, I really should, like I never looked for part-time teaching jobs or anything. So no.
Okay. Well, but you put it through for like 2 years.
Yeah, 2 years.
Good on you. Good on you.
Yeah. And to be fair, I still don't make very much, and nobody at Wayfinding at the moment does. We made the decision early on when we started it, and this is going to have to shift and evolve and change over the years. But we made the decision early on that everybody would be paid the same wage. And at first it was literally exactly the same wage. For the
30 to 35, I saw it.
Yeah, and at the beginning, literally every person, some people were full-time, some were half-time, some were three-quarter time, but they all got paid exactly the same full-time annual salary, just prorated based on what, because there was no way of distinguishing whose role was, like everybody was doing everything and we were all equally important and without any of us. So it's also one of my personal gripes about the way higher education runs is that the administrators, the people at the very top levels of the organizations are paid lots and lots and lots and lots of money in most cases. And then the next level is like faculty who are often paid way less than administrators, but a lot more than staff. It's like the closer you get to interacting directly with supporting students, the less you are compensated for that. And that seems backwards to me and wrong. So we made the decision that we weren't going to do it that way, that no matter what your role at Wayfinding, you're paid literally exactly the same at the beginning. And now we have a little bit of distinction, mostly based on years of experience, but not entirely based on that.
Right.
And so everybody's within the same like $3,000 range. And it's going to stay that way.
We're talking about yearly, annual.
Yeah, yearly annual salary. So I think right at this very moment, and this is all about to change because we're entering a new fiscal year, but I think the person somebody makes $30,000 a year and somebody makes $34,000. So I guess that's a $4,000 range at the moment. Yeah. And then that's all shifting up where everybody goes up to like 32 to 36, or, you know, the whole band shifts up because of cost of living increase. Yeah. And we all get a small monthly stipend to help with health insurance. And it's the same whether you're full-time or part-time, but we all get a very small amount to help pay for that. And so it's just like equal all the way through. And that was an important value that we wanted to reinforce from the beginning. So I still make very, very little. We all do. Yeah. And I make no more than anybody else on the team as the president. So I still, and now thankfully I have 3 years of experience of living on a very, very, very tight budget.
Right.
And so now I'm finding myself able to pay off all this debt that I hadn't been able to pay off before when I was making twice as much as I'm making now.
How crazy is that?
It's amazing. The less money I have, the more I'm able to pay off debt.
Oh, wow. Yeah, well, interesting.
Everybody should try this.
Yes.
Try this at home, right? Not the crowdfunding, but yes, the paying off the debt.
Get a lower
ask for a lower paycheck.
Yeah.
And no, don't do that. But maybe you restrict yourself. I don't know.
Yeah. So I feel that a good way to get introduced to the Wayfinding Academy would be, imagine yourself, you're at a dinner at a friend's place, and then you don't know like most of these people in this dinner table, right? And they're like, hey, you know, actually your daughter is going to a college, and Michelle runs a pretty unconventional college, right? And then you have 5 minutes to explain like what you do and see if it might be a good fit to this other person's daughter. Like, what would that sort of conversation look like?
Is the daughter present? No. Or is it just the parent?
Just the parent.
Okay. What I would start with then is and I guess I would do this if the daughter was present. Oh. But I would start. It's probably about the same. It's just who I would ask. Okay. The first thing I would do is start with questions. Ooh. So I would ask. I would want to find out a little bit more about the daughter and what the daughter was interested in, and what the daughter's experience that thus far with education has been, and what are the things that so far in this daughter's life has made her really excited or thrive or happy or come alive. And depending on the answers to that, I would try to figure out whether Wayfinding was or wasn't a good fit for them. So Because wayfinding is not the right fit for everybody.
Right.
If somebody wants to take a very traditional path, we've had a couple of times when somebody would apply to us and they say that what they really want to do with their life is become an accountant, or one person said a forensic psychologist.
Right.
And I thought, like, there is a very clear career path to do that. And if you already know that, you should probably just do that path.
Right.
Like, just go for that. If, though, the parent tells me things like, well, she's not really sure. You know, maybe she's taken a couple of college classes, but they don't really work out for her and she's not very excited about it. And her interests are sort of all over the place. Like, maybe there's some interest in art or something creative. And there's also an interest in social justice causes, or being of service to the world, or making a positive difference. Or, you know, it's this hodgepodge of a bunch of things that there's no very clear path to. I would say, well, it sounds like wayfinding might be a good fit, because that's how our application process starts with prospective students. The first question is, who are you right now? What are you interested in? The application they fill out for us is it's a lot of introspective thinking questions. We're told that it's a really challenging application.
Oh, yeah. I heard it's only 10 questions and people freaked out.
That's right. But it's because it's like, we ask things like, well, what's been your journey so far with education to get to this point? Why do you want to go to college at all? Why do you think you want to go to wayfinding? What are some 3 big questions you have right now that 2 years from now you would like to be further along in your thinking about? What's a community that you've been part of that's really changed your perspective on the world? What's a time when you had a deeply held belief and you got some new information about it that changed the way you thought about that particular topic? Like, these are not easy questions. But we want...
Even they have the experience to have those...
Oh, they do. They do, but they've never been asked these questions. Most of us at that stage of our life are not asked these sorts of questions. We're asked really superficial things about, tell me a time when you were a leader, or what, you know?
Right.
And so I don't think we ask deep enough questions and give young people enough credit for being able to have those answers within themselves. Because I guarantee you, I read these applications all the time and I have these conversations with young people all the time. They absolutely can answer these questions. Those answers are inside themselves. It just takes them a while to tap into it because nobody asks them these things. And that is where I think, so it also tells us, if they're not willing to engage in that process, they're not going to be a good fit for us, because that's what we ask them to do for the 2 years that they're with us. So the entire program is designed, so the degree that students get at the end of wayfinding is in self and society. So they get an Associate of Arts degree in self and society. So half the stuff that they're doing with us is self. It's introspection. It's internally focused. It's who are you? What are your values? Who do you want to be in the world? What does the good life mean to you, right? So you have to be down for doing that. You have to be down for willing to look inside and think about these things deeply. If they're not willing to do that first application with us, they're going to have a rough 2 years, right? And then the other half of what they do is society focused. So it's really studying what's going on in our world right now, both at the local level and at the global level. And when we started wayfinding, Obama was president. We had no reason to believe that was about to shift. So that's another interesting tidbit in the history of wayfinding. Like our planning year and the first half of our first year, Obama was president. And the last year and a half, that's not been the case. Right. And that has changed the conversations and the urgency with which we have mostly the urgency with which we have these conversations in our curriculum and in our building. So I think for people who were here at the very beginning and in the planning stages and being like, oh, this all sounds nice, having a class on communicating effectively, having a class on engaging with information, that sounds lovely. Everybody should know how to do effective research and get at real answers. But when the first time that class was taught was when Donald Trump was sworn in as president. And so now there's a whole segment on that class, and there has been from the beginning, about fake news and figuring out what you can trust and what you can't trust and how to make those decisions for yourselves and not to listen to all the things that other people are, and how to go out and you have a question you want to answer. And how do you find sources that are intentionally going to give you alternate information to the information you would naturally be exposed to in your own Facebook feed or news feed or whatever, right? Wow. That we didn't think about. Like, we didn't think, oh, we're going to have to addressed this from the very beginning. So half of what they do in the curriculum is this society-focused stuff. So it's local stuff in the city of Portland and the state of Oregon. It's national stuff that's going on, and it's international stuff that's happening. So what we're trying to do the entire time with the curriculum is having them grapple with both of those things at the same time and find a way to put the two things together. Wow. So that they're figuring out who they are and what the world needs and what's their particular specific place in that. And so a lot of what they do with us is self-directed and customized for each individual student, because it's got to be that little sweet spot in the middle. So one student might decide that their sweet spot is going to be creating compassionate conversations through art that help change the world. And somebody might decide that they want to tackle the problem of toxic masculinity in the way young men are raised right now in the United States. And somebody else might decide that through their writing, they want to help people who have had abusive situations throughout their childhood and as they're growing up, connect deeper within themselves and work through some of that pain. So they choose whatever they choose, and it's their own niche. And we help them cultivate that niche while providing these foundational things that help them discover those things both at the personal and societal level. Right. That sounds really complicated when I say it like that, I realize. So to the parent, I would have probably said some of those things, but what I'd be asking is like, what is it about that? Like, what does your daughter care about? Like, who is she right now? What's been her life story? Do we have any evidence that the traditional education system is not a good match? Has she already tried it? Has she done homeschooling? Has she done a gap year? Like, is there something that indicates that opting out of the traditional path is a thing that's probably a thing that's right for her? And then it's like, what is she interested in doing? What are her passion areas? Is it art? Is it social justice? Is it whatever? And is there something else that's a better match for her? Like, is a gap year better? Is going to a trade school better? You know, is something else better than a wayfinding? And if it's this blob of, I don't know what I want to do, but it's like this plus that plus this, and there's no clear path, then wayfinding probably really is a good match.
Because how interesting that you frame it like that. Although I understand where you're coming from, is you're sort of like, the wayfinding this is where it fits along the spectrum of the different solutions for educations, right? But what's funny is that I see it as, man, this is the basics. Like, if you can't get this, like, I feel like this is like almost mandatory. And if I were to do school again, I would do this, right? Because I feel that, like, if you can learn how to learn, that's like a tremendous big meta skill. And if you can, communicate effectively, that's a huge meta skill. And I call this the multiplier skill. So if you can say, let's say Jamie Oliver, which who knows, maybe he might be a great cook, but he's not the best cook in the world. Right. But he have great charisma, great communication, and then he can cook. And I think like that sort of multiplication makes him who he is. Right. So I sought that category of what a lot of curriculum that you have to do under the category of multiplier skills. Yeah.
I think that sounds right to me. And the other thing I'd add to Jamie Oliver is he has a why. Like, he has a purpose behind what he's doing and why he's doing it. I might be a little out of date, but my most recent understanding is that a lot of what he's doing is to try to fight childhood obesity issues in the United States. And I think without that why, that's hard. And so the other thing, obviously, I shouldn't say obviously, I mean.
Right. But assumptions.
Well, I mean, it seems obvious to me, right. But a wayfinding student finds their why. Like, all of our students who are about to graduate in 2.5 weeks, they know their why. Like, you could ask them the boring question of like, what are you going to do next? And they can answer it. They don't love that question. What they like better is being asked, like, who are you now that you want to continue to be after you leave the wayfinding program? And what is your why? What is your passion? We also talk about it in the term of ikigai, the concept of it's that, like, what people are willing to pay you for, plus your passion, plus what the world needs, but all these things magic come together. And they can answer that question. And I think, and I guess I agree with you on that in your, this is the basics comment. Oh, yeah. Because even if you want to be a doctor or a lawyer or a dentist or an accountant or something for which there's a very, very clear must-use traditional higher education path to get there, I still think if you were to do something like wayfinding first and understand your why and understand your purpose. So like, why do you want to do accounting? What do you want to contribute to the world through that particular set of skills? And how do you find your niche within that brings you joy and brings you purpose and brings you passion? Even if to an outsider, it just looks like, well, you're an accountant. There's still a lot of value in that. And I think everybody would benefit from doing something like this first.
But it's hard to explain it to others about.
Right.
Yeah, and I only learn about all this like once I've sort of reached a stage where I'm like financially comfortable, and then we're like, well, actually these skills are pretty good.
Right. Absolutely, yeah.
I'm gonna take a left turn over here. Why do you want to put wayfinding under the category of nonprofit? And would that might change, might not down the road?
I don't think it'll ever change.
Okay.
Part of the reason is because we're having a little bit of a crisis right now. Maybe that's not, you can't have a little crisis.
Right.
Maybe you can. Right now with higher education in a couple of ways. One of the ways is that you've got a lot of for-profit higher education institutions where a lot of people are making a lot of money and not serving students very well. And a lot of them happen to be going bankrupt, going under, just stopping to exist, and have taken advantage of students and their families. And so that was a non-starter for me. Starting a for-profit college would have automatically placed me in that huge skepticism bubble. And I was already going to be in like wait, what is this kind of bubble? Because it's like a brand new college that didn't exist before. And there are none in the country like us. So like a private nonprofit liberal arts 2-year college is not a category really. Like the state of Oregon doesn't have this category. They had to figure out what to do with us when they approved us with the OHEC, right? Yeah. So that was just a non-starter. The other thing about nonprofits that they have going for them is they have that community element built in. So you're legally obligated by the IRS, if you're going to be a 501c3 nonprofit organization, to solicit donations. You must have support from your community in order to exist on some level. Now, our financial model, and you can have me tell you lots or little, I will start with little, about financial model. Yeah. But our financial model has about 40% of our revenue coming from the community, which is not common in higher education. That's not the way most of it runs. As a nonprofit organization by IRS regulations, we could have it be much, much less than that. Like the nonprofit college I used to work for before this was 95% of their budget came from tuition dollars from students. So they had a much smaller amount of community support, right? But embedded in the IRS designation is that you have to have some. And because community and college woven together is so important to us, that gives us like that mandate that we can't ever neglect that. So for us, that felt important.
Do you think that being a nonprofit, would have any problems with like student unions or for the teachers? I mean, on the teacher unions, and also does it have any conflicts with, let's say I would like to pay someone a little bit more because like they are more expert or like.
No, you can still do any of that if you want to do any of that. The nonprofit doesn't restrict you in any sorts of ways like that. I mean, my information's so out of date, and I'm not going to get this exactly right. Sure. But it's like the CEO of the United Way was making several $1 million a year. Yeah. Like you can pay people whatever you want to pay, even as a nonprofit. Right. And you can have, most of the faculty unions that I've seen at colleges are in nonprofit colleges or in public colleges. So all of that still exists. So it doesn't really change that. It's more of a philosophical decision about who do we want to be in the world, not about necessarily the way we function.
Okay. And what do you need to do to be qualified to be a nonprofit?
You have to get IRS approval to be a nonprofit. Right. So the federal government decides. It's mission-based. And so what the government, every year when we file our end-of-year tax returns, the federal government, the IRS, looks at all of that to decide, are we still doing things that are in clear alignment with our mission? And if we deviate from our mission, they can take away our nonprofit status. So right now, if somebody donates to us, they get a tax deduction for that donation. And if we lose our nonprofit status, that all goes null and void. So the government is making sure that we are staying within the parameters of what we have stated as our mission. Got it. So if we were to start doing a whole bunch of crazy things over on the side, they'd be like, nah, you can't do that, right? Gotcha. So, and some colleges are getting in trouble for stuff like that.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move into the curriculum. And I want to start like at a very high level where there's no grades over here.
Right.
Yeah. Why do you take on that belief? And, does that affect the incentive and the motivation to learn?
Definitely. But I believe it affects it to the positive. Okay. So, so we don't have grades. That never came up as a discussion point for us. Like, it was never like a do we or don't we? It was always a we're not having grades. So we don't have grades. We don't use textbooks. We don't have tests. We don't have quizzes. Right? Everything is project-based, and we do narrative evaluations. So grades don't really tell anybody anything about somebody's passion or ability to learn or ability to do things or ability to think for themselves. It turns out to be just sort of a sorting mechanism, and it's pretty arbitrary, based mostly on what the faculty member's personality and perspective is.
Right. And do you think also it might be because that a lot of the subjects they are teaching here don't need grades, because you're not trying to teach them physics or...
Well, they're not that different. Well, we do have science, right? Students took a class on physics of everyday things, and we have a science, technology, and society class. And so a lot of our classes are not that different than... One of the behind-the-scenes thing with the state of Oregon, the OHEC approval, is that we have to still offer, to get an associate's degree at the end of this, we still have to have a certain number of credits in the humanities and in the sciences and in the maths and in the writing. And we don't get out of that. We still have to have that. But we've embedded it and woven it through. Yeah. So we don't have a science class, a math class, a humanities class, a psychology class, right? We have communicating effectively, and science, technology, and society, and the good life, and understanding our world, and understanding ourselves and others. So it's all woven through and embedded through. So we still have all those subjects. Yeah. And at traditional colleges, they certainly do give grades in all those subjects. But
because grade could also be like a form of a test to know where your understanding of that certain subject is.
But I think that you don't have to have grades to test understanding. I think you have to have some way for the student to share with the faculty member their knowledge on those subjects, and the faculty member to engage in a dialogue with them to understand where they're at with their learning. I don't think there needs to be a test and a grade. So what we do...
So we're saying that the grade might just be an easy opt-out. Might just be an easy opt-out.
Yeah, it certainly makes it way easier for faculty members.
Right, because you don't need to talk to each one of them.
Yeah, you don't have to talk to each student, you don't have to get to know each student, and you get to standardize the mechanism by which they deliver the information to you. You create one test, you hand it to all of these people, they give you back the exact same thing, you get a key, and you get to, right? It's way easier.
So if I were to look at it from another perspective, is that, say for example, let's take calculus as one of the subjects, and instead of a standard regular test, I'll be like, okay, well, let's do some calculus right now. And then we will go through a calculus assessment, and I will then give you a evaluation.
Well, so can I use physics instead as an example?
Sure.
I think it's the same, right? In a traditional college, somebody would take a physics class, they'd study a physics textbook, there'd be lectures on physics, and then there'd be a test where they have to prove that they can calculate things using equations and that they can, right? So similar to calculus. And so we had a lab here, a seminar class, a short class on the physics of everyday things. And that instructor has a master's degree in physics, he knows what he's doing. And he is able to teach them a concept of physics show them how to work out the math and work out the whatever, and then say, now it's your turn. Now you design an experiment where you're going to make a prediction about what's physics-wise, what's going to happen when you drop this thing or throw this thing or get this thing, pour this thing and that thing. They used toilets flushing, they used ball throwing, they used all kinds of things. And he had them each design an experiment based on something they were interested in, sports, skateboarding, whatever. And then he would have them do the predictions, do the experiment, work out the calculations of like what just happened to check whether they were right or wrong about their predictions, and report back. And he was able to tell based on that project that they were doing and what they showed him, do they understand the concepts of physics? Can they do the calculations? Can they work the formulas? And would they be able to then do it again? Can they transfer that knowledge from this skateboarding thing that they just did to, if two people are falling into a pool, who's going to fall faster? Right. Can they transfer that knowledge to this thing? So he was able to do all of that without ever giving them a test or ever giving them a grade. And then, so at wayfinding, I think students hate this, that at the end of every class, whether it's a short class or a long class, and also throughout on every project that they do, and each project, each student gets to design it. So rather it being, so most learning at most traditional education is faculty centered. Yeah. It's easier for the faculty to give tests, to give lectures, to pick a textbook. This is all student centered here. So the faculty are facilitators of helping the students get what they need. So every student gets to design their own projects in the class, and they can write things, they can make videos, they can do podcasts, they can create interpretive dance pieces or art pieces or make a presentation, whatever it is that works best for that student based on what they're trying to build. And they customize it for their own areas of interest and passion. So it's all student focused, and the faculty member has to roll with what the students want instead of the other way around, which I think is how it should be. But that's, again, a whole nother conversation. Right. Yeah. So at the end of every project and at the end of every class, these faculty members spend hours and hours and hours writing feedback and writing these narrative evaluations for students. Okay. And so at the end of every course, faculty write paragraphs about what is this student's strengths? What is the student's area for improvement? What is their overall narrative? You had 3 to 5 learning objectives for this course, ranging from everything from like pretty basic standard stuff like critical thinking to big things like what it takes to do something epic. Right? And you have to evaluate each student on each of the things you said were important in your class, and then you have to write a narrative. Why? Why did you give this student a mastery rating on what it takes to do something epic? Or why did you give them a capable rating on that? So the faculty have to do a lot more work on behalf of the student rather than the other way around to really give the student informational feedback that will help them to hone their skills and develop their skills and get better as they go. So, I mean, yeah, we don't have grades, but what we have is way more complicated and way more valuable, I would say.
And what is the difference between mastery and capable? I mean, I know it's hard to quantify really because
and each faculty member gets to define that for their own selves in their class. So in their class, in their roadmap, which is what we call syllabi here, is they say to earn a mastery in this class, these are the things I'm looking for. Or to earn a mastery on this project, we're looking for So each faculty member gets to, based on their own course, define that. Right. Because some courses are more project-based and some are more discussion-based and some are more where participation is essential and other things are more like participation in the room with their cohort mates is more essential, say in a communicating effectively class. But if what we're asking them to do is something much more introspective and reflective and deep thinking, they maybe don't have to be doing that in the room with the people. They could be doing that on their own, and only the faculty member sees that and can evaluate them based on that. So it's a little different for every class, but the faculty members are entrusted to decide that, And the other thing I should mention curriculum-wise, because it's my favorite part and we haven't even mentioned it yet, is the guides.
Oh, yes. We can talk about this. Okay. A separate topic altogether. But I'm going to just call on the list of curriculums that you have, and I hope it's in the right sequence. So there's Wayfinding 101, Understanding Our World, Understanding Ourselves and Others, Engaging with Information, Futures and Citizenship, Communicating Effectively, Science, Technology and Society, Making Good Choices, And lastly is the good life.
Right.
Were there any, let's start with, were there any topics that you had to add in because of accreditation? Were there any topics that you had to cut out that didn't make the board because you only have 2 years? Maybe it's a time thing. Let's just start there.
No.
Oh, okay.
Which is one of my huge surprises, because I sat down with a bunch of smart people, designed what we think is the ideal wayfinding program, submitted all the paperwork to OHEC, and kept our fingers crossed, because we figured for sure they would say, oh, you really need more of this, or you need to add this, or you need to... Nothing.
Okay.
So it is as we originally intended it to be. Now, that doesn't mean we've gotten everything exactly right, and we've had to tweak things along the way, right. But we haven't changed any of the core classes. We haven't added anything or subtracted anything.
Yeah.
And we haven't changed the way it all fits together. All the students do 2 internships. All the students have a guide. All the students do 12 of these labs or seminars. So that has all remained as we designed it.
Tell me a little bit about the sequencing a little bit. Okay. Why do you put it in this sequence? Or, why can't we put the good life at the front? Let's right. tackle the biggest questions, right?
Right. So there are some things that are flexible. So our first cohort took things in the order that I had mapped it out originally. Oh. And our second cohort is taking it in an ever so slightly different order. Not very, very different, but a little bit different. Huh. The only things that I feel that I hold sacred in terms of the sequencing of it is that the first thing is Wayfinding 101, and the last thing is the good life. Because the first course is a deep dive in who are you? Why are you here? What are you trying to do? What are we trying to get out of this? And that seems like the place to start. And the good life, which is being taught right now for the very first time, so we'll see, but it seems like it's working. Yeah. Is that as they prepare to leave this place where they're surrounded by people who think about these things more or less the way they think about, or at least are willing to engage in this kind of thinking, and they're about to go out into the world where they don't have that kind of a support system, one last chance to really solidify for their own selves what is their definition of the good life. Yeah. And actually over here on the wall, you can see a lot of the things that they talk about in that class: gender expectations, love, money, health, death, happiness, success, community, career. They break down what society's norms are about those things and create their own definition for each of those things, so that when they leave here, they've got reminders of who they are and who they want to be in the world, and they can carry that with them. Not that they're not going to have to do that again at some point in their life. We all do. But they're at least leaving here with that solid foundation. The other thing I hold sacred is that anytime, so students are usually in 2 core classes at once.
Yep.
Sometimes they're only in 1. For example, right now they're only in the good life, because that is yeah, right. So, and we need them to also have space in their schedule to do internships and other things. So by the end, we've got them in just 1 class. They're doing 1 class and an internship, or 1 class and preparing to graduate and leave, right? But whenever they're in 2 classes at a time, I want to make sure that 1 class is self-focused and the other class is society-focused. So of those 9 courses, about half of them are self and half of them are society. So that's why at the beginning, they are concurrently in Wayfinding 101 and Understanding Our World. So that they're having to grapple with both of those things simultaneously, because that's how the whole program is designed. I think a lot of the stuff in the middle is kind of flexible. So for example, the first cohort, in their second term, they took Understanding Ourselves and Others. Because I thought, well, that makes sense. At the beginning, you've now done Wayfinding 101, you've got some foundation of who you are, let's build on that, and now let's add in other people. Now we're trying to figure out how teams work, and how do you collaborate with others effectively, and and it was fine. But cohort 2 is taking that at the beginning of their second year. And I think that might actually, we're going to find out, but might actually be even better, because they've now know themselves really well. They're in a cohort model, so they know each other pretty well. And now what we're trying to do is help them refine that. Help them refine, here are my peers. We now need to get together and do something. How do we best make that work? And now we trust each other and we understand each other's strengths and weaknesses. We can put together a more effective team with more knowledge and intention. I think it might work better. We're about to find out.
Right.
So I think some of those middle courses can shift around, and it might turn out to be that it depends on the cohort. I can tell you our second cohort was not willing to work in teams with each other their second term. Now they are, and they will, and they'll be great. But if I had tried to make them do that back at the beginning, we would have had disaster. But I think that's fine.
Why do you think so?
They're just they're a different cohort. They're really different. They're much, and I think this is positive. This is what we want. This is where we're going. This is intentional. They're more diverse. Our first cohort has a lot of diversity of age, lived experience, socioeconomic background, but they're all white. And they all come from a somewhat same like world view, if that makes sense. Our second cohort is not that way. We have a lot more gender non-binary folks in that cohort, students of color. We still have the same age range, and they came from all over the country kind of range. But they're much more diverse in their lived experience, in their worldview, and their background, and their perspectives. And that takes a longer time for them to build up the trust and the willingness to be vulnerable and the willingness to understand each other and find their common ground. So I think you can if you've got a somewhat homogenous group and you put them together and ask them to do something together, they're going to be able to do that quicker, easier than when you've got a more heterogeneous group. And we want, the more diversity we have, the better, like no question. And it means that we have to be willing to make some of these adjustments when we bring in a cohort and we learn who they are and we realize this is where they are right now and this is what they need next. And because we're small enough, we can do that.
And would you want to touch on the numbers really quick? Because we have two special numbers here. We have the number 24 and we have the number 150.
Yeah. I hold the number 150 sacred. I don't hold the number 24 sacred, and I'll tell you why. The 150 there's a lot of research by a sociologist, anthropologist named Dunbar. So it's like Dunbar's number. It's often also called the law of 150. And it says that any community where everybody needs to know each other, like genuinely actually know each other, know something about each other. 150 is the maximum size you can have before that starts to deteriorate. And 150 is pushing it. Like that's a lot of people. So I've decided that I don't want wayfinding to ever get any one location of wayfinding to ever get larger than 150 people. In our case, in our model, that probably looks like something around 100 students, and then the staff and faculty to support those students. The building that we got, when we had very few criteria when we were looking for buildings, but one of the criteria was that it had one large space that fit 150 people, that we could grow to that size in that building without having to move to another location, and that once we could use that building forever, right? So we have one large space in this building that will fit that people, and then once we get to that size, which is probably 3 years from now, we would open a second location. The way we get to that size is by bringing in cohorts of students. Originally, we thought the ideal cohort size was 24.
Originally, you thought?
We had to pick a number to build all of the modeling off after and all of the budgets after. One of our board members suggested the number 24. This is why I don't hold it sacred. Because 24 is divisible by a lot of things. You can divide it by 12 or 6 or 4 or 3 or 2 or... So sure, but the odds of getting exactly 24 people at any given time is real low. So our first cohort was 15, which gave us a good starting point to see how does that feel. And it felt like, actually, that's pretty good. We could be a little bit bigger than that. Everything is discussion-based. Everything is cohort-based. So we need it to be a manageable number of people. If you put 24 students in a college classroom and expect them to have a conversation, that 24 is too many people. You can't hear all the voices and respect and see every student if you've got 24 of them. You can if you have 15. Apparently you can if you have 18, because our second cohort came in with that many, and we were able to do it there. We think the sweet spot for an ideal cohort size is probably in that ballpark of 18, maybe 20, because not all of the students are going to finish the entire program. So you need to account for that a little bit. But if you really want to see and hear and be true to every student individually and see them all as human beings, whole human beings who you really get to know, I think 24 is probably too many. But there's an easy way to solve that. Right now, we're only starting one cohort per year. So the model assumes that in the next year or two, depending, we would start 2 cohorts per year. So we'd start one in August, and maybe that one in August is 15 or 18 or whatever it is. And we start one in January, and maybe the one in January is 6 or 8 or 10. Yep. And then you still have the same number of students and the same growth, but you are still able to maintain that cohort model where everybody can have a genuine, solid community. So I don't hold 24 as sacred as I hold 150, if that makes sense.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So 18, so 15 and 18, or 15, 20 might be a good number over there.
Yeah.
Wow. So I want to do a deep dive on one of the classes the curriculum or the core curriculum they have, and then we're going to jump into guides because that's really cool. I think it's really cool.
It's like my favorite part, I think.
Yeah.
And it's the most unique.
Yeah. So one of the core pieces of things that I'm personally trying to explore is this idea of like the separation between crafting yourself and nature versus nurture idea, and like what are those traits that we pick up as identities to help us get what we want in the society, and it's all well and natural. We are all survival and replication machines. Versus what might be the real answer of like what are some of the categories of sorting of who we are, like our height or our hair color or whatnot. How deep or does that course cover in that sense?
I feel like that's always a conversation we're having. I think the wayfinding students are always having that conversation for themselves and always trying to unpack and redefine and really think about. Because they're almost like, when they're here, they're almost like pausing their life in a moment. Mm-hmm. And they're doing a whole heck of a lot during this pause. Yeah. Like what they have done in their 2 years is more than I have done, with the exception of the last 2 years, in any 2-year period of my entire life. Yeah. What these students have done is unbelievable. The quantity of it, the quality of it, the depth of it, no matter how you look at it. So I say pause, but there's a lot of activity in that pause. Yeah. So I think one of their ongoing conversations through that entire 2 years is this very question of how did they get here? How much of who they are right now is fixed and how much of it is changeable? And how much of it do they want to change? How much of it do they not want to change? Where did it come from? Understanding where it came from, understanding where it's going, understanding how their agency in the direction of that. So I kind of think it's an implicit thing that's happening throughout the curriculum through the entire 2 years that they're here. And I think it starts in that first course. And it continues in the Understanding Ourselves and Others course, and then throughout the guide program in some other ways. So we do give them things like the inventories, the ones you hear about all the time, the Myers-Briggs type indicator and the strengths finder and So they take those things, but they often push back really hard on that stuff. Because, for example, they get their Myers-Briggs results and we go through some activities on what does it mean. And their immediate reaction is, no, I'm not that. Like, yeah, the description might fit me, but I can't be put in one of 16 boxes. Like, I'm not an ISTJ. Like, that's not a thing. That's like too simplified. I'm way more complicated than that. And they rightfully so push back against any label and any category and any attempt to put them in a box of some sort and have some external thing define them. And once they get over that, they then start thinking about it in, what can I take from this? Mm-hmm. How does this help me understand myself a little bit more? But more importantly, how does it help me understand others? Mm-hmm. So the one that easily is talk aboutable is the introversion extroversion. Mm-hmm. Like, they understand who they are in that framework, but more importantly, they say it helps them understand how to interact with other people more effectively and genuinely. So because a lot of them arrive here having done a lot of what you described, where they've adopted these characteristics to help them manipulate the world and navigate the world that are not genuinely who they are. So they spend their first period of time here, and for some of them it's a longer time, some it's a shorter, breaking that down and getting to the core of who they are, and then learning how to show up as those people and not the people that their parents or society or whoever told them to be. we've got a couple examples right now of folks who, one guy, his whole family went to business school. His entire family went to business school. He grew up on the East Coast. Going to a fancy, expensive business school is the thing you do. That's just how it is. And he was an athlete all through high school and got a scholarship to play baseball at a fancy business school on the East Coast. And that was exactly what everybody expected him to do. And he went and he did it, and he was miserable. And when he arrived here, he was just at the beginning of this process of breaking down all of those narratives and figuring out what things he had adopted to make the external world give him accolades and praise and he was like a straight A student, right? For all of his life. And he realized that doesn't define me at all. And baseball doesn't define me. And going to a fancy business school doesn't define me. And all of these things. And so I think one of the accidental things, but nothing's accidental here, but it's an implicit part of the curriculum, is navigating all of that. Because to some extent, if we're going to thrive through the rest of our lives, we can't keep putting on the masks and the facades that everybody else says we need to have.
Well, also knowing that those are labels and maybe even use them as tools to get what you want.
Right.
Yeah, because there's a big question there to unpack.
Yeah. And we could probably talk about that for days. Days.
Philosophical way to look at it. And yeah, I read a bunch of Eastern philosophy, and that's another whole thing altogether. But let's talk about guides, our favorite thing. So let me give you what my understanding of a guide is. Okay. You fill in the gaps. So I talked to Meg earlier today. Good. And so one of the core pieces of Wayfinding Academy is that every week you spend 45 minutes with this person that they try their best to put you with that might be a good fit. They ask you a couple of questions. And then you spend 45 minutes talking to them. And one of the things that Meg told me that stood out was that she learned about something called pressure scheduling or worry scheduling, where maybe this question of who you are is a bit too big, but I would like to schedule it in term 4. And put that in there. Yeah. Or this internship thing, man, because she's quite anxious. Yeah. So it's okay, well, let's put it here. That's when I will start worrying about it. Yeah. And I was like, wow, that's kind of cool. Yeah. So maybe you want to start me off on how do you look for, what do you look for when you hire or when you get a person as a guide, and mistakes you made along the ways, and the guides that stood out, they're amazing, and what kind of traits and characteristics that they have, any common traits that they have over there, and all that good stuff. Take it away.
Oh, geez. I believe that the guides at Wayfinding are my version of the magicians here. What the guides do with their students is certainly magic. And I'm sure you got that when talking to Meg. I'm sure that came out in that conversation. Because what the guides do is get to know every so each guide has somewhere between 4 and 7 students. And the guides get to know those students extraordinarily well and serve in a lot of roles for them. They're like their academic advisors in that they help them navigate the Wayfinding program and get the most out of it. If they're struggling in a class or they have a project assigned to them and they're not sure how to approach it, their guide helps them talk that through based on lots of knowledge of what they have about that student and their strengths and weaknesses and struggles and passions and interests. But they're also kind of like a life coach, sort of, because they're helping them find their next step all the time, like helping Meg find an internship that's going to be a good match for her. Or she wants to leave her part-time food service industry job so that she can get a part-time job that makes her come alive, that also provides some income, and her guide helps her with that. But they're also their accountability buddies, because they're also the person that says, well, you told me 3 weeks ago that you were going to do this next. How is that going? And so they check in with them all of the time. And they also have to help students navigate all kinds of things that come up in life. In any two-year period of your life, just think of what you go through, right? And especially with the world being in as much turmoil as it's being, and especially with them being in as much of a stage of transition in their life as they're being. So these guides field everything from relationship questions to gender identity questions to housing and roommate questions. And the guides are not therapists. So they have to also be really good at setting boundaries of saying, I can help with these things, and that thing is out of my scope of expertise, and I'm going to refer you to these people because they can help with that thing. So the guide also can't be the student's best friend because they've got to be the one to call them on their crap when they need calling on their crap, right? Like, so it's this really complicated role.
Hard.
Very hard. I think it's the hardest role we've got. And the people who do it are the ones who are willing to let the students be first always. Because sometimes they have to set aside their own personal thoughts of how something should be done or how they would do a thing to meet the students where they're at and really understand the students. They also have to be really, really, really good listeners and really good question askers. So they also have to, and this is a weird one, and I'm almost hesitant to say it because not all of our guides are this, but they have to be organized. Like, the things that they're asking students to do, they also have to be able to model themselves. Right. So if they say they're going to do something, they have to do it, the guide. Because they're holding that student accountable to that same standard of conscientiousness and follow through with your word. And if the guide can't do it, they certainly can't ask their students to be doing it. So I guess to your question of where I've gone wrong is that and it's only happened once so far. I'm open to, I may screw it up again, but I hired someone at the very beginning who's a fantastic human being, is one of the most gifted teachers I'd ever met in my entire teaching career. So for my first set of faculty, I just hired the best teachers I knew from all of my previous life who wanted out of the traditional system and wanted into something more meaningful for them. And I pulled them away from that and I said, here you go, here's your place. And they were like, thank goodness this exists. And I hired somebody who is tremendous. He's an incredible soul. He's so dedicated. He's so passionate. He's so social justice minded. He's a really good listener. And he's a really good teacher. And he helps students find these things inside themselves that they didn't know were there. He turned out to be a bad guide because he had a lot of stuff going on in his life, right? And he wasn't able to follow through on every single thing he said he was going to do the way we need to model for students. He just had too much turmoil. And our guides, our crew in general, but especially our guides, have to be solid and foundational because our students are not going to be. They're going to be doing all of this change for 2 years. And we have to provide this steady foundation and ability to check in and they have to know we are always 100% steady and there for them, and whatever they need, we've got their back. So if we have turmoil, not that we don't share that with them because we're all humans too, they know that, but they also have to know they can count on us all the time. And he had too much going on. He still teaches classes, he still has really good relationships with students, he's still all these great things, and the guide role was just not the right role for him. So that's one of the ones that I've learned. Because the
new criteria that you add on to the list. Right?
I guess so, yeah. That I didn't know until I encountered it, and then I realized, oh, right, we need guides to also be like this. And like I said, it's magic. I don't know how they do what they do. It's a really hard job.
So what kind of questions do you ask students to match them with the right guides?
And I actually ask the guides and the students the same questions, right. Okay. Slightly rephrased, but basically what I'm looking for is some kind of commonality of lived experience. So by the time a student gets here, I have their whole application and lots and lots and lots of information, and we've probably talked multiple times. So I know a bit about their lived experience. I ask them if there's any elements of their lived experience that they, if I can, that they would like me to try to find in their guide. So if their gender identity, for example, is really important and I can match them on that, if they really want me to try, I'll try, right? I also ask them, like, what type of, they're going to have this person with them for 2 years, what type of support do they generally want? Do they want somebody who's a little bit more like rigid and hold them accountable and like set deadlines and keep them organized? Or do they want somebody who's going to be more soft with them and more like cuddly for a while and a cheerleader and cheer them, right? And then I ask guides the same thing. Are you more like the good accountability buddy who holds people, you know, and is really organized? Or are you better at cheerleading? Are you better at... And do you have any guides that you think you really couldn't work well with? Like your lived experience. Is there anything that you think I just wouldn't be able to help somebody who comes from this type of background or this type of lived experience because I have no knowledge of that or I have no expertise in that. And then I try to make the best matches I can. But, I have a team of 3 guides or 4 guides for every cohort, and we do our best. And we have a mechanism for students to switch if they need to switch, if something comes up, if there's a serious conflict.
How does it look like, the mechanism?
It's basically they go to the guide program coordinator and they usually talk with their guide first and they talk about why it's not working. And sometimes the guide adjusts and the guide says, oh, okay, I realize that for you, like for my other students, I do this thing, but this isn't working for you. How do we adjust so that it works for you? And sometimes the guide and the student just figure it out and they adjust and it works. And other times there's the student maybe the student at first thought what they really want is somebody to hold them accountable and set deadlines and whatever. But then they get here and they realize, no, I really just want a cheerleader. And I've partnered them with the first type and they're like, I really want the other type. So then we're like, okay, well, how do we make that? Sometimes the guide can switch, but we're humans and we have personalities and sometimes we can't make that dramatic of a switch. So we end up switching the student to another guide. But we try to do it all open, transparent, open conversation as much as we can, and so far we've been able to do that.
Does the student find it hard to sort of bring out those conversations, because those are crucial and difficult conversations?
Yes, they're crucial and difficult, and in the first few months it's very hard for students to do that, and we find that they usually go to somebody else first, and we send them back to their guide and say, can you attempt to have this very crucial hard conversation knowing this is hard, what we're asking you to do is a big stretch. We ask students to stretch all the time. Stretching is a big deal at wayfinding. We all have to stretch, including the crew and the guides. And they usually are willing to attempt that stretch. And then after that, if they come back to us again, we say, thank you for trying that. Thank you for having that conversation. What did you learn from it? And now, yes, we'll help make that change for you. Because, Yeah. So, but we've found that as it's gone on, like in the first couple terms, the students would go to their guide first if they're something's not working in a core class, right? They're like, oh, this teacher's style doesn't work for me, or I don't think they're giving us enough. What they tell us is they don't think the teacher's giving them enough to do. They're not giving them enough reading. They're not giving them enough projects. That's usually the complaint we get. And they come to their guides. That never happens at a traditional college, by the way, never. So they'd go to their guides first. And then what we've been seeing in this current term is they don't go to the guides, don't get that anymore. They go straight to the faculty now and say, I'd like you to make this harder for me. And then the faculty adjusts. So students have learned how to advocate for themselves and have those difficult conversations.
What I like about it, just to put a footnote there, is that you go to the right person and get the person to do, so if your problem is this and this person has the responsibility or ability to change the thing and make a problem go away, then you go to that person and finding the right source to solve your problems.
Right. Yes, the guides help with that a lot, for sure. Yeah. So I feel like the guide is the most unique thing we do and the most magic thing we do and the hardest to explain. So thank you for asking about it, because it's complicated.
No, I betcha, because I almost have no idea. How do you hire for one? Do you just hope for magic again?
Yes. Yes. Can I expand that question a little bit? Because this is not just guides, but that's how I hire in general.
Matchmaker?
I generally hire, I first always try to hire from the people I know. So my founding team was me reaching out to my network and saying, I'm starting my own college, who wants to help? And then seeing who showed up again and again and again and again. And then when I started to have actual paid employees, it was those people, right? We kind of hire that way for other stuff too, right? So some of the people on the team now were hired because I got to know them over a period of time and they showed up consistently and they said, I really wanted help with this, or I have skills in this. And then they'd volunteer their time or they'd keep doing things. And then an opening came up and I said, you seem like a great fit for this and you've been following along with us for a while. What do you think of this? And then I hire that way. If I can hire that way, I do.
Right.
I can't always.
So you have a lot more longitudinal tests of their character, and instead of what they say, you can see that.
Yes. exactly. And they know the culture. We're a pretty unique culture. We're really flexible, so we don't track hours, we don't track vacation time. Everybody is empowered to as long as they get their job done, they can do it however they want, from wherever they want, whenever they want. If you're student facing, you need to be here more. If you're not, you can be here less. We have a weekly crew meeting that everybody has to be at, but other than that, so that takes a certain type of person. And so the people who have been around a lot, we know that they get that and they can work that way. Some positions are harder. For example, just this morning, I hired a new, and this is also very sad, a new chief business officer. Because my founding chief business officer, who's Danish, moved back to Denmark 6 months ago. He and his wife had been planning on doing that for a while, and when wayfinding came along, I'd known him before. He said, I really want to help with this, and I think I've got some special skills and talents that you need to get this thing started, and I'd like to dedicate myself to helping that happen, and then we're going to proceed with our life plan already in progress and move to Denmark. So you've got this much time with me, and then I'm going to...
Right.
And he moved to, he gave me like an extra, I think 8 months beyond what he had originally thought. And then he moved to Denmark and finally got another job over there. And I needed to hire his replacement. And I didn't know anybody, it turned out, in my network who could do what he did.
It's a linchpin.
It's nearly impossible to replace him. And so I ended up having to do what most organizations do, and I posted the job on all these online job search sites and took applications, and we did interviews, and we did all this stuff, and we found this wonderful woman who Biaga interviewed remotely and made her show him all her spreadsheets and prove that she could do all of the things he can do. And then another team member and I here interviewed her for culture and fit with the organization, and she seemed fantastic on both levels, and so I offered her the job yesterday, and this morning she accepted. So sometimes I hire using like more traditional models of hiring, and I don't think we always get it right, but we try to do a lot of intention and a lot of purposefulness with that process so that the odds of it sticking are really, really good. And so far we've only had 2 that didn't.
On the note on guys, I mean, like if you wouldn't need to hire another one.
Right, which I do every year. Every year I have to hire new guides for the new coming in students.
Do you have a process to sort of like a little test, mini test or whatever to know, because talking about it is very different than, I mean, I think it's almost impossible to test for integrity and conscientiousness. Or maybe we can look at their calendar, I don't know.
That's where a lot of this, like if they've been around for, so one great example is the guy that I just hired to be a guide for cohort 3 taught a lab with us first. So he'd been following wayfinding from the very beginning and reached out to us and said, hey, I've got these skill sets. I could teach labs on these topics. Are you interested? And he had a really fascinating background that's pretty diverse. Yep. And he taught a lab on sustainability, right? So like environmentalism and sustainable living, which was great. Students loved it. But what I learned through that process was students loved him, right? He was a really good teacher. He was really good at making connections with them. They all felt seen and heard by him. He also, kind of magic, got this whole group. His lab was full. He had like, I don't know, 15 people in it. And he got them to do all the things he asked them to do when he asked them to do it, which, you know, like with that many people, with that much going on. And he gave them feedback, really in-depth, really thoughtful feedback on everything they did. And they loved him. And so when I had a job opening for guides and I publicized that and he applied for it, I thought, interesting, right? Like he's been around, he gets wayfinding, he knows wayfinding. I was able to ask the crew who had worked with him, how did that go? They were like, oh, he's great. Great email communication, does everything he says he's going to do, meets every deadline we set for him. Students said fantastic things about him. And then I met with him, and then students met with him, and then other guides met with him. And then we kind of pool our knowledge, and it's like, is this person going to be a good fit? Do we have any red flags? Do we have anything we need to know? So we kind of use this like take as long as we can to get to know somebody kind of a method, which I guess is a test. Yeah. We don't have a very specific, because they all come to us different ways. So my other guide for the 3rd cohort is also my director of student services. And so I see her work in a lot of different capacities, and she will pick up the guide role when the next cohort starts. And so by watching her work with students, I know she's got this. So it's different for every one of them.
Understandable. I mean, time is short. Yeah. We're gonna move on to funding real quick. Okay. So 200,000, you got it. We talked a little bit about how we got there just now. How did we manage to sort of like use the fund? And you're also going to be starting another. It started already, right? It started already. It's counting down.
It is.
I hope I can get it.
It is counting down.
Yeah. So, how do you use the $200,000 that you got from 2015, and why do we need another one now?
The first $200,000 we used for our entire first year of starting up. So that paid our first few employees, that got us into a building, and there was a lot getting into the building. You have to like change city coding, zoning for the building, and like do all of that sort of paperwork. It got us through that. We have to pay fees to the Oregon Higher Education Coordinating Commission. It got us all the basic things you need, like websites and paying a developer to build our application process. So it basically just set up all the foundational stuff. So most of that first $200,000 went to all that, to getting everything ready, everything in place, everything set for the first students to arrive. So it's kind of our like runway before students paid tuition. So it did. It got us through our entire first year. We even had a little tiny bit left over to get us started with our first year with students, right? So the reason we're doing another one now, and I think, and don't hold me to this, but I'm pretty sure this will be the last time we do a crowdfunding campaign.
Ooh.
It makes sense to do it now. So we have a current one. We've switched from Indiegogo to GoFundMe because Indiegogo changed its platform and it no longer does crowdfunding campaigns for nonprofits. So we switched to GoFundMe. And we have a current GoFundMe campaign. The goal is much lower. It's $60,000 this time. Because we already, back then we didn't, but now we already have a steady stream of ongoing support from our community. We have luminaries who donate on a monthly basis, who provide approximately 22% of our annual revenue just by continuing to be involved. So we don't need to raise a large chunk quite like the way we did before, because we have their continued ongoing support, for which we're extremely grateful. The current thought was we have a moment here, one moment where we are celebrating for the first time ever having our first ever graduation of our first students. So we want to celebrate that. Crowdfunding campaigns are a good way to like spread word far and wide about something that's happening. So the video that it accompanies our campaign is about the first 2 years of our first cohort of students and what that looked like. We also, our board chair, Charlie, says that we are leaving the starting up stage and entering the growing up stage, which feels about right. And so we're entering this growth phase. We've been growing. The numbers say we've been growing about 20% year over year, and we're about to take a little bit of a leap. In the next couple of years, we'll double the size of our student body by taking in larger cohorts and more than one cohort per year. And we're about to launch our second program, which is called we're calling it the Lifelong Wayfinding Program, and it's for older folks. It's for folks who are in their later stages of career or maybe approaching retirement or maybe already retired, and they want a wayfinding-like experience. Similar to what you said earlier, people tell us often, hey, if this was around when I went to college, I would have done this. And so we got to thinking, well, why can't we create this for people who are at later stages of their life, where we do the same sorts of things? They get a guide, they do Wayfinding 101, they get the good life. It's shorter, it's like a 6 to 8 week program. We're gonna offer it for the first time next year. So if people are interested, if anybody who is watching this or hearing this is interested, they can reach out now and say, I wanna be in that first cohort of your lifelong wayfinding program. I think we're offering it for the first time in early 2019, and we're going to sign people up in the fall, so over the next few months. And we're going to do construction on this building because we've made it work, but we have all these weird storage spaces because the building used to be a YWCA, so we have shower rooms and steam rooms that we use for storage that could probably be better used as classrooms. Yeah. So as we grow, we're going to need more classrooms. So right now we have this moment in time to celebrate our first ever graduation and to launch our growth. into the next stage of what wayfinding is going to be. And so for us, it seemed appropriate to go back to our community and say, you helped us get the thing going. Let's help it grow and get them involved in this. So just like we have this founders wall up above here, we're going to create a brand new supporters wall. We have a couple of design ideas, but nothing confirmed yet, so that everybody who donates to this one also becomes a supporter, a growth founder, right? So we're doing it now. I don't think we'll ever do it. I don't think we'll ever do it again. So it's kind of a unique opportunity to say, yeah, I think this thing should exist. Yep. I want to be part of it. And it doesn't, like, our lowest donation level is $10 and our highest is $10,000. And in our original campaign, we had people who gave $10 and we had people who gave $10,000 and everything in between. And of course, they always get the tax deduction, but when we do a crowdfunding campaign, they also get some sort of reward, right? You can also get, like, to go with us on a Learn and Explore trip, or you get to get a ticket to a TEDx event, or you get individualized coaching on how to travel hack more effectively. So you also get something in addition to so that's why we're doing it now.
I'm intrigued on the lifelong wayfinding classes. 6 to 8 weeks. What's the commitment? What is the intensity? What's the cadence, and how is it a reduction from the core curriculum? Right. What's there and what's not going to be there?
Some of this the cadence, I'd say, and the rhythm, we don't know until we do it. But we have an idea of what we think it would be like. It would all be on site, in person, here in the building, which also offers an intergenerational learning community opportunity, because we'd have our students who are here in the traditional 2-year program who are on average younger, and then we'd have the older generation of students, and they would be interacting on a variety of ways, informally, not often in classes, but sometimes in classes, right? But the 6 to 8 week program is going to take the first course and the last course. So it's going to be mostly self-focused, less society-focused, although we're never going to get away entirely from the society thing. So it'll be basically a blend of Wayfinding 101 and The Good Life, and they'll have a guide. So they'll meet probably 3 or 4 days a week in class, in person, with a faculty member in the building, and they'll have a guide who they would meet with for 45 minutes a week, so sort of that accountability check-in partner every week for that time. And then they'll also get to do all the other things that are happening at that time. They can take labs that are going on at that time, go on Learn and Explore trips. They could do an internship if they want. So any other resources that we are always offering, they can opt into any of that they want. So it might mean some people are moving here for 6 to 8 weeks to do the program with us and then returning to their life back wherever. Or it might mean that they already live in Portland and they're going to do this with us and then go, stay in the community.
Great. How's your brain working on over here? Because we are like so stretched, and
I know.
Well, the rounds of the quick questions, I want to run it by you.
I can do the quick questions. Okay. I'm surprised when I look at the clock. I'm like, wow, I can't believe we've been talking.
I know, me too. It's good conversation. So quick round of questions. The questions are short, but your answers don't need to be.
Yeah. But I'll try.
What is the books you have given most as a gift?
The book that I give the most as a gift is The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. Have you read that one? Yeah. So I reread it about once a year, and I find that I get something new out of it every time, depending on what I'm doing in life. And I always give it as a gift, and I never try to tell people what to get out of it, because it's different for every person.
All right. What have you purchased recently under $100 that has most impacted your life in the last 6 months or a year?
I don't buy much, tiny house and all, but every year I buy a new pair of running shoes, and I usually buy it in the spring, so it was just a few months ago, because for 5 years I've walked the Camino de Santiago pilgrimage in Spain, and it's now a Learn and Explore trip. We take students every year now, students and community and crew and faculty go, and we spend 15 days walking on average 15 miles a day across Spain. So I always make sure I get a new, fresh pair of shoes before going. And I usually buy last season's styles so that I can get them for under $100.
There we go. What is the exact, do you know?
They are Brooks Cascadias. Okay. And so I recommend literally to everybody who's going on the trip, I say buy Brooks Cascadias or something very much like it. In fact, We are working on getting a sponsorship from Brooks to see if they would be willing to give us a certain number of free pairs of shoes every year to sponsor our Camino trip each year. And a friend of mine just started working there. There you go. I now have an in.
What are some of the worst advice that you see or hear being dispensed in your world?
In my world, I often hear people saying, or just making the assumption, embedded assumption, even if they don't say it outright, that putting things online is the answer to everything. And I think that that's wrong. I actually think that in higher education, the trend to put more and more things online learning, online classrooms, online all of this, is a significant part of the problem. And I actually think what we don't have enough of is in-person, face-to-face, genuine human connection in community. So every once in a while I have somebody either make the automatic assumption that, oh, you're a brand new college, everything must be online. Nothing is, yeah, we have a website and we do all that stuff, but everything is in person, face-to-face. And then I have other people telling me, oh, you know what you should do to expand is you just put everything online and then you grow. And that is bad advice.
Yeah. When you think of the word successful, who came into your mind and why?
And maybe it's just because we're approaching graduation and I think about them just about all day, every day, but our students, the ones graduating, but also the ones not graduating. For me, they're successful because they've taken on something with intention and purpose, and they've done really, really hard work. What they do every day to show up and continue to engage and dig deep and find their purpose and come out the other side with confidence and intention. It's really hard work, and so that to me is what success is. And it's the ones graduating are the most obvious example, but even the ones who are just starting the program with us in August, or the ones who are halfway through, they've also got it. They're also doing that work and are being successful.
Are there any routines or habits that you find important, morning or evening?
I think this is a thing that surprises people to learn about me, because I do so many things that seem to be innovative and unique and creative and whatever. I am the most routinized person you might ever meet, because I live in a tiny house. If I can create a system and a routine, that means I don't have to spend any brain power on. I eat the same thing for breakfast every single day, right?
Walk me through the first hour.
That's right. The first, I wake up, I do the same thing, I take a shower, I do the same things in the same order in the shower every day. I get out of the shower, I start the tea. While the tea is where I make the egg, literally everything is routinized.
Oh, what's the breakfast?
Oh, it's 2 fried eggs and on toast.
Okay.
And tea. Every day.
Okay.
No variation. It's very weird. Even on weekends, even when I don't have to do that,
right, I
still do that.
And any evening stuff?
The evening thing that I do now, this is kind of a new routine for me, because starting this is very hard. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. It's also the most rewarding and most joyful thing. But I have very bad self-care habits, and I will work and work and work and work and work from the moment I wake up till the moment I sleep. So one thing I've started doing recently is spending the last, half hour to an hour before I go to sleep each night doing something to shut my mind down. Usually that's taking surveys online to get airline miles, so that I'm still doing something sort of productive. Sometimes I multitask where I watch Netflix while taking surveys, but so that I can sort of turn my mind off slowly. Otherwise I find that it keeps going while I'm sleeping.
Any most common misconception about you or your work?
Yeah, not about me, but about the work, I think. One of the most frustrating misconceptions for me is the assumption that accreditation is the answer to things. We don't have time for me to get into the process of accreditation and how it all works and the nerdy nitty-gritty of all of it. But we are often asked the question, are you accredited? And often the people asking the question don't know, they just know they're supposed to ask that. They don't know why they're asking that or what that really means. And so I have to ask a few follow-up questions to get at what the question is that they're really asking me. Whether it's about, do we grant a degree, or are the credits transferable, or has some outside agency looked at us and said, oh yeah, you're actually legitimate. Like, I'm not sure what they're getting at until I start asking some follow-up questions. It's frustrating to me because the way that higher educational regional accreditation works in this country is really discombobulated at this point and has strayed away from its original purpose and is trying to get back, and it is running into all of these barriers. A lot of them are political, a lot of them are financial and budgetary, a lot of them are a result of the way that the US Department of Education runs. And it's really complicated, and having accreditation doesn't actually mean what people who are often asking think it means, and does not guarantee that, like, unfortunately, and I think this is a huge loss for our community, there was a university in Portland that's been around for 125 years and has all of the accreditations, and it just shut down 2 months ago. Because of, depends on who you ask, financial difficulties, low enrollment numbers over a long period of time, maybe leadership challenges, maybe changing times and not being able to keep up with changing times and demands of what our society needs in terms of higher education. Depends on who you ask. But they had all of the accreditations, and they abruptly and suddenly shut down without people being... So just because you have some stamp of accreditation doesn't actually mean what you think it might mean. And using it as a shortcut to try to answer a question is lazy, and really doing the real research. So that's one of my frustrating points, is people ask me that, and if I say we don't have regional accreditation yet, and it's partly because we haven't been eligible to apply for it until really recently, and partly because of our regional accrediting agency needing to get a new president in place and thus putting everything on hold for a year, which says nothing about us and our quality and our legitimacy. So it's a really complicated question and scenario, and people assume that that's the only question they need to know is this accredited? And if the answer is yes, we're good, and if the answer is no, we're bad. And that is not accurate. So it's a huge misconception.
Also put in a quote that I really love over here by Maria Popova, who writes on brain pickings. Yeah. A culture of news is a culture without nuance. And that's something I'm trying to explore in this long-form podcast, because there's so much to talk about.
So much nuance, yeah.
Are there any requests for the audience? Last parting words, thoughts to take away, to consider, to try, or otherwise?
Okay, sure, yeah. I guess at this very moment, at the present moment, the most helpful thing, and depending, I mean, it sounds like this is going to go live relatively soon. So at the present moment, the most helpful thing somebody could do is, if they're inspired by this and they think this should be an option, that this should exist, and that they believe in the same things that Wayfinding believes in, is probably to contribute to that crowdfunding campaign, which is the easiest, quickest way to join our community right now. And that doesn't mean it has to be lots of money. It can be $10, it can be $50, it can be $10,000. If we can get one of those, holy moly, that would make a big difference. So immediately, that's probably the thing. But in the longer term, the thing that people could do to help is to refer students to us, because most of the students that we have, we get through word of mouth. They hear about us from somebody in the WDS community or in the TEDx community, or a high school counselor or a high school teacher tells them about us, or a friend of a friend tells them about us. So usually we're pretty unique, we're pretty nuanced. So it's because somebody says, hey, I know you, I see you, I understand who you are, and I learned about this thing, and I think this is a thing that's a good match for you, you should check it out. So I think that's the long-term thing that anybody can always be helping us with, is help us find the people out there for whom wayfinding will make a huge difference in their life, and they just don't happen to know about us yet.
I'm going to sneak in a little bit like one tough question over here before I ask my final last question.
Brian, okay, no, go ahead.
People find you on the internet.
Yeah.
Because so this is something that everybody sort of defines differently, but how do you define purpose?
That is a hard question.
Yeah.
I guess.
Or we can come back to it and I'll put it as a written form on the.
Well, it feels, to me, it feels like, I think it feels different for everybody, but a couple of commonalities is, so I really like Simon Sinek's talk on the power of why. So it's knowing your why. Because if you can't explain your why, then you haven't yet found your purpose. It doesn't mean you don't have purpose. It means that you're still looking for it. You're still trying to figure out how to articulate it. So I think it's that. But the other thing I think for me and for everybody I've seen who has found their purpose and starts living based on their purpose, one thing that's significantly different for them is, and I guess I take this from The Alchemist, is that the universe conspires to help them keep doing what they're doing. So once you're on your purpose, once you're on your path, things get easier. You might be doing something so hard, but it's easier. Once you're doing the thing you're meant to be doing in the world, what your purpose is, roadblocks start clearing. You suddenly start finding 700 people who are willing to give you $200,000 to start the thing that you want to exist in the world because they want it to exist also. So, and usually that's just an internal compass thing that once you start doing it and you start noticing like, oh wait, this is getting easier. Something's different. And then you just kind of keep going. And when you get off the path, you feel it, life tells you, and then you just kind of like course correct and you get back. So I feel like paying attention to that internal compass and having other people around you who also see you and can reflect back to you when they see that you're on or off the path or ask good questions, or like our guides do a really good job of doing that, and they keep those students' stories. They're like story catchers for them and can reflect it back to them. That helps too. Got it.
Where can people find you or your projects, the projects on the interwebs?
Yeah, we have the normal things, right? Okay. Like website is wayfindingacademy.org. Don't even get me started on what it takes to get a .edu domain name. The regulations are bizarre. So we are .org for the time being, wayfindingacademy.org. We are really active on Facebook and Instagram. We also have other things like Twitter, but we don't do as much on Twitter. We found that for us, Instagram and Facebook are the more effective ways to communicate with our platform. With our community. We also have a YouTube channel. So if you're like intrigued and you want to like see things in more depth, we have a series of, I think, 14 videos that's called This is Wayfinding, a series that our documentarian made over the past year, and it dives deep into all sorts of things, including the most viewed one we have at the moment, I think, is our campus tour, where one of our students gives a tour of the campus and tells stories as he goes.
Great.
So that stuff.
We're done.
Yay.
Oh my God. Do you have brain melt?
A little bit. I can talk about